Second, it was because if he went, he would be a little embarrassed. However, since Ai Xiaoxi had begged him, he couldn't refuse. After all, he did have a relationship with Ai Xiaoxi. Okay, I will return home 2 days in advance. Let's talk about it when we meet. Hearing Ai Xiaoxi's words, Jiang Hai agreed. It's okay if I'm tired. I'll just treat it as a trip back home. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi was naturally grateful on the other side of the phone. After saying a lot of good things, she hung up the phone. Looking at the hung-up phone, Jiang Hai couldn't help shaking his head. He originally thought that there was nothing to do recently. Now it seemed that even if he didn't look for trouble, trouble would come to him. After hanging up the phone, Xiaoxi started gesturing with all her might. In fact, these days, she had been struggling whether to call Jiang Hai or not. Because she also knew that this was a test. If Jiang Hai didn't want to come back and meet her parents with her, maybe in Jiang Hai's eyes, she was just a toy. If this was the case, then she didn't have to struggle. Maybe she should set her position in her heart earlier. But if Jiang Hai was willing to come back, although she would still struggle, it would be a sweet struggle. Just like now, she was afraid to call, but Jiang Hai still didn't come back. So after a few days, she deliberately chose a time when Feng Yunshen was asleep to call Jiang Hai. But fortunately, the ending was what she wanted in her heart. Although she still struggled with her position, at least it proved that Jiang Hai had her in his heart. Jiang Hai was willing to come back for her and was willing to meet her parents with her. Since Jiang Hai was willing to make such a sacrifice, then it didn't matter if she struggled a little. Holding the phone and looking at Jiang Hai's photo on the screen, Ai Xiaoxi couldn't help but feel happy. She was already thinking about how to treat Jiang Hai when he came back. Should she also give her behind to Jiang Hai? Why, are you going back to China? At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know Ai Xiaoxi's thoughts. Seeing her hang up the phone, Jiang Hai also put the phone back in his pocket. Because of the phone call just now, although it was exciting, it distracted him. Dana Taylor in front of him also stood up and then squatted in front of Jiang Hai. She asked Jiang Hai while cleaning up. I may go back for a few days at the end of the month. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Mid-Autumn Festival. Speaking of which, he really hadn't celebrated this festival in a long time. Now it seemed that he could go back to China to experience it. Oh, there's still time, but you have to solve all our problems before you leave. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Dana Taylor laughed and once again posed in a new position. The battle continued. Half an hour later, Jiang Hai and Dana, who was walking a little light, returned to the winery, but at this time, the grapes were almost all picked. Jiang Hai rushed to cut a basket of grapes before going back for lunch. During lunch, Zhang Zian told everyone about his plans to return to China at the end of the month. Although it was only the beginning of the month, it was better to inform them in advance. Most importantly, he was going to Ai Xiaoxi's house this time, so it was inappropriate for him to bring other people along. It was better for them to understand the situation. Mid-Autumn Festival, we haven't celebrated it for a long time. Hearing Jiang Hai say that he was going back to China to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival, Bernice couldn't help but be stunned, and then said with a little yearning. That's because you haven't celebrated it for a long time, sister. I celebrated it at home the year before last. Hearing Bernice's words, Xiaoya smiled and said to Bernice. Hearing what she said, Bernice couldn't help but glare at her. Then why don't you come back with me? Then go home and celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival. After that, we'll come back together. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said to her. He didn't know much about Bernice and Little Ya's family situation, but he really regarded them as friends. It can even be said that they are members of this manor. If they want to go back, it doesn't matter. Forget it, let's not go back first. Xiao Ya's condition is still in the maintenance period. I'm afraid that the air or something after returning to China will trigger Xiao Ya's condition. It's better to stay here for the time being. We'll go back during the new year. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice shook her head and said seriously. For her, the most important person in the world was Xiaoya. Although Xiaoya's condition was basically stable now, she still hoped that it would be stable for a few more months. Anyway, during the new year, Jiang Hai will also go home, and they can go back together at that time. Well, I shouldn't be away for a few days this time. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. He indeed wouldn't be away for a few days. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite couldn't help but ponder for a moment. Just as Dana thought, Aphrodite was still very concerned about whether Jiang Hai would complete her plan or not. Thinking of this, she got up and left to find Page Hall. Now was not the time to rest. She had to arrange the people for the night, and the person who should be doing it today was Page Hall. Compared to Hilda, Page Hall's situation was much better. Although she was very shy when she heard that this was an arrangement to serve in bed, she wasn't as shy as Hilda to the point where she couldn't even hide her face. Instead, she agreed readily. People's personalities were set by God. No one's personality was completely the same, including the personalities of Aphrodite and the others. Aphrodite's personality was calm but very passive. Even without Aphrodite, Jiang Hai also knew Dana Taylor. After interacting with her for 2 days, he could understand that this fellow's personality was bold and unrestrained. Hilda Leonard's personality was shy but very stubborn, which was also what Jiang Hai understood. Page Hall's Huaigu was decisive and daring. She was a girl with a lot of ideas, and Aphrodite might usually listen to her. But she would still listen to Aphrodite unconditionally on such matters, because what Aphrodite said would definitely not be wrong. As for the remaining 4 girls, their personalities were also different. Sheila Rodney's personality was free and easy, somewhat similar to Dana Taylor's, but also somewhat different because she almost didn't care about anything. She didn't care about how much money she made, whether she lived well, or what she wore. In short, she was very free and easy. Asheria Clive was a cute girl because she would often be absent-minded. While talking, she would look elsewhere, and then it would take a long time for her to react, and then she would blush and apologize to the other party. Bridget Nelson, on the other hand, was a very timid girl, but she would definitely complete the task given to her. Although Janice Joy was the youngest, having just turned 18 this year, she was the most gentle. Usually, Goldie and Xiao Bai liked Janice very much, and Delina and Marion were also her good friends. However, although they were about the same age, Janice and the others were different from Delina and Marion. Delina and Marion were Jiang Hai's daughters in name. They had the right to live here, and they had to take the initiative to fight for it. Chapter 545. What happened next was the same as usual. They picked grapes in the afternoon, and then waited for the grapes to be picked in the evening. After dinner, it was time to take a bath in the hot spring. This afternoon, Page Hall was as shy as Hilda was the day before. But she was much better than Hilda. She did not delay her work, and even when she looked at Jiang Hai, there was nothing strange. She would just quietly look at Jiang Hai during the break, waiting for the night to fall. Finally, the sky gradually darkened. Boston got bright and dark early, just like the northeast of China. At around 6:00, the sky was already a little dark. Dulles and the others had finished picking the grapes and were ready to go to bed after dinner. But before dinner was ready, an old car drove to the gate of Jiang Hai's manor. In fact, the people of Winthrop were familiar with this car. Because the owner of the car was none other than the car of Wharton Kirk, the mayor of Winthrop, who was nominally the largest town in the town. Seeing the mayor coming, Jiang Hai did not wait for dinner and directly opened the door to let him in. "Hi, Mr. Mayor, what can I do for you?" Looking at Mayor Wallace, who got out of the car after driving to the parking lot, Jiang Hai asked him. In addition to him, there were 3 people around him. They were basically not young, about the same age as him. After the 4 people got out of the car, they were still talking and laughing. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace also greeted him. "Oh, Jiang, it's like this, these 3 are my old friends. They heard that we are doing tourism here, and it's quite popular, so they came to take a look. At night, us old guys can't sleep, so we are going to go fishing. There are no suitable boats in the town, and some fishing boats have to pick up tourists to play tomorrow morning, so I thought of borrowing a boat from you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace smiled quite happily. Recently, he had been beaming with success, just like the smile on his face right now. Winthrop's tourism industry, with the help of Jiang Hai, had been fully developed. Up to now, they had received a total of more than 900 tourists from Huaxia. These tourists were generous and kind. Of course, the most important thing was that they were generous. In addition to buying lobsters from Jiang Hai, they would also buy makeup products, clothes, bags, and so on. Naturally, they also had money for going out to play, shooting ranges, horse ranches, going out to sea, eating seafood, and so on. On average, each person would spend about $1,000 to play here for 5 days. In fact, this was not a lot. Of course, if you were poor and did not buy anything, but the tourists from Huaxia would more or less buy something. These things were very expensive in China, but they were very cheap here. Most importantly, the quality here was very good. Speaking of which, her clothes and makeup products were brought back from the United States, so 13 spaces would instantly increase. So, the tour guides on Jiang Hai's side didn't take the tourists to any shopping centers at all. They had to find and buy these things themselves, which was why they didn't have any complaints. With $1,000 per person, even if there were more than 900 people, Winthrop had already earned $900,000 this month, and that was not including the money for the tour groups to stay here. Jiang Hai could get about $250,000 of the $900,000, and the remaining $600,000 or so came from Winthrop's town hall and the residents here. Winthrop wasn't big to begin with, and every store here earned about $10,000. $10,000. That would be $120,000 a year, and that was only the money given by the Chinese tourists. His regular income was also included. It wasn't hard for the people who opened restaurants or small shops to earn more than $200,000 a year. Thinking about it, they were a little excited. They were sincerely happy for Mayor Wallace and Jiang Hai, who had brought such a big change to them. Mayor Wallace used the town hall's income to make money. Not only did he fix the public transportation system, but he also hired a lot of cleaners to ensure that the land and the sea were clean. After all, they relied on these things to make a living, so they naturally had to clean up properly. At the same time, it solved a lot of work problems. White Americans disdained to do this kind of garbage collection work. Black people were too arrogant and didn't like to do it, but immigrants from small countries still liked this kind of work because it wasn't too busy and paid well. Because of this, the Boston government specially sent Winthrop's town hall a commendation. After all, the current environment wasn't very good. Solving the work problems would be a great help to the government. Therefore, Mayor Wallace had been living quite well recently. At the same time, because Winthrop had become famous, many Americans nearby also came here to play. After all, for them, playing in Winthrop was much cheaper than going to a famous beach. For example, his old friends might not have seen each other for a few years, but now that Winthrop had become famous, they also came to play. But what was the night fishing they were talking about? No problem, but what's the matter with night fishing? There won't be any risks, right? When he heard Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai nodded. It's just borrowing a boat, not his yacht. He didn't care much about the boat, but he was curious about night fishing. These old men wouldn't want to go fishing in the open sea for a night. That would be very dangerous. Jiang Hai didn't think that Mayor Wallace would want to go fishing for a night. Well, it's dangerous, more or less. We are going to go fishing in the open sea. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace said with a smile, and hearing his words, the 3 old men around him seemed to be even more excited. Go to the open sea? That's too dangerous. It's summer recently. Although there is no storm warning, everything is not accurate. Why don't you just fish in my fishing ground? Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai said with some worry. Summer is the most important season for typhoons. Generally speaking, ships will avoid going out to sea during this time. Although it was already September, according to Huaxia's saying, it wasn't the end of the season yet. Even if it's summer, it's easy to have accidents in summer, especially at night. These old men are too bold. Fishing here? We can't fish anything here, we still have to go to the open sea. Who knew that it would be better if Jiang Hai didn't say it, but as soon as Mayor Wallace said, he almost spat out a mouthful of salt soda at Jiang Hai. He looked at Jiang Hai with a look of contempt. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled a little awkwardly. Indeed, the fish in Jiang Hai's fishing ground are not easy to catch now. He doesn't know if it's because of the water grass with spiritual energy or the feed that has made these fishes smarter, or their taste has become better. Of course, it's also possible that it's both. Anyway, the fish in Jiang Hai's fishing ground are quite difficult to catch. Generally speaking, if you come to Jiang Hai's fishing ground to fish with the best clam silkworms, the success rate of catching fish is pitifully low. In the past, when Mayor Wallace was bored, he came to chat with Jiang Hai. When he heard that Jiang Hai had a lot of good fish here, he became interested and wanted to go fishing once to take a look. One must know that there was no one on the coast who didn't know how to fish. But who would have thought that after 3 hours of fishing, he would only catch 2 palm-sized fish? This made him very worried that Jiang Hai would suffer a loss. So he took a pair of swimming goggles and went into the sea to take a look. As a result, he found that the fish in Jiang Hai's waters were dense. The density of the fish was not normal. Or in the sea, those places where fish were concentrated might not be so dense. But these fish didn't mix with the water, they didn't die, they were alive and kicking, and they didn't want to be caught. Since then, he knew that Jiang Hai's fishing ground was strange. He would rather fish for codfish at the small dock in Winthrop than come here to fish for grouper. So now, when he heard that Jiang Hai wanted to fish here, he almost spat at Jiang Hai to death. Okay, then I'll borrow your boat to fish, but I'd better go with you. I don't feel at ease letting you go alone. Looking at Mayor Wallace's murderous look, Jiang Hai also raised his hands to show that he surrendered. You're going too? Are you okay? What's wrong? You don't want to leave your boat? Hearing that Jiang Hai also wanted to go, Mayor Wallace laughed. I'm okay. How can I be okay? It's not that I don't want to leave my broken boat, but I'm afraid that if anything happens to you, the people in Winthrop will eat me alive. Anyway, you can fish here, or I'll go with you. How could Jiang Hai be okay? He had a date with a beautiful woman. Although he didn't know who would come tonight, he guessed that someone would definitely come. But Mayor Wallace and the others were more excited, and Jiang Hai definitely couldn't persuade them to go back. Rather than that, he might as well go with them directly. It was unlikely that these old men would really fish for the whole night. Okay then, when do we set off? Mayor Wallace also knew that Jiang Hai was worried about them, but they also knew that they weren't young anymore, and it would be more reassuring to let a young man like Jiang Hai follow them. So Mayor Wallace also raised his hand, indicating that he would rather let Jiang Hai follow than fish here. Absolutely. I haven't eaten yet, wait for me to finish eating. Jiang Hai looked at the 4 excited old men in front of him and couldn't help but say helplessly. Then he wanted to let them in, but the 4 of them didn't want to go in. Instead, they sat directly on the chairs outside the villa and chatted there. As for Jiang Hai, after entering the room, he first had dinner with everyone. Then he apologized to Aphrodite because he didn't know who to say it to, so he could only let Aphrodite do it for him. Chapter 546. No need to apologize, I think she'll be happy to wait for you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite smiled. There were only a few grapes left to harvest tomorrow, so it didn't matter if Jiang Hai or someone else was absent. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little speechless, but he didn't refuse. Instead, he smiled and touched his nose, then packed his things and left. The 5 of them went fishing outside, so naturally, a lot of things were indispensable. For example, beer. 5 people sitting outside enjoying the sea breeze. If there wasn't anything to drink, who could stand it? For example, some snacks such as fish fillets, fish bones, and shredded squid were all produced by Jiang Hai. When Mrs. Philemon and the others had nothing to do, they would dry some and make some to eat as snacks. After all, the fishermen and cowboys were usually quite bored at work, so if they made a lot of food, they would naturally send it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai didn't care much about these snacks, but the girls liked them very much. Unknowingly, he took a big bag of things and 2 boxes of beer before leaving the room. As soon as he walked out of the villa, the 4 old men saw the beer in Jiang Hai's hand, and their eyes lit up. Although they were all foreigners, and although they were all Europeans, people liked to drink different things. For example, people in Western Europe liked to drink red wine, people in Central Europe liked to drink brandy, and people in Northern Europe liked to drink vodka. People in South America liked to drink fruit wine, people in the Caribbean liked to drink rum, and people in the United States, because they were immigrants, drank more mixed drinks. But most people still liked to drink beer, especially clear beer. It tasted good, wasn't expensive, and most importantly, didn't go to the head. They wanted to go fishing at night, but in fact, it was just a spur of the moment. They prepared some food and fishing rods, but they didn't prepare beer, but they didn't expect Jiang Hai to help them solve it. After loading these things into a 4-wheeled vehicle, Jiang Hai took these things with Mayor Wallace and his 3 old fellows and drove to Jiang Hai's pier. Jiang Hai's pier was manned 24 hours a day. Of course, if it was a typhoon or something like that, they wouldn't stay here. But if the weather was good, they would still stay here. Jiang Hai had a total of 5 fishermen: Edward Anderson, Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marlon Rupert. These 5 people usually worked in shifts. Because Edward Anderson was only one person, he would stay here for 2 days a week. The rest of the time, the remaining 4 people would take turns. Every week, one person would stay for 2 days, and the rest of the time, one person would stay for 1 night. As long as the radio was kept running at all times, there was nothing to do. Staying here was just watching TV, drinking wine, and playing with mobile phones. The night would pass quickly. Jiang Hai and the others had already called to inform them that they were coming over to play. Tonight, the one keeping watch here was Eleanor Cece. This big black man had already prepared a boat for Jiang Hai and the others. The boat was a small boat, just like what Jiang Hai said, but his boat wasn't small. Jiang Hai's small boat was the limit of a small boat. It was 11 meters long and could seat 8 people. Regardless of size, quality, speed, stability, and so on, it was the best choice. After it was shipped over, Edward Anderson had also remodeled it. The front was the driving room, and the 2 chairs in the driving room could be placed flat, which meant that they could sleep on them. The 2 rows of benches behind the driving room could be used to fish or pulled out to form a big bed for sleeping. In other words, if Jiang Hai and the other 4 were sleepy and wanted to sleep, they could sleep here, although it would be more or less crowded. At the back, there was a steel frame hanging on both sides. It could be closed directly and covered with a rainproof cloth. It was windproof and rainproof, and it was very stable. The most important thing was that this small boat had a built-in ice box. The fish that were caught could be placed inside to be chilled. Of course, before the fish were brought up, the box could also be used to cool the wine. It was really remodeled to suit Jiang Hai's intentions. Naturally, Jiang Hai's intentions were also very much in line with Mayor Wallace's intentions. After boarding the boat, the 3 old men were curiously touching left and right, while Mayor Wallace sat calmly at the side, looking at the performance of these 3 guys who looked like country bumpkins. It must be known that he used to be a country bumpkin in front of these 3 people. Now, the tables had turned. This feeling of exaltation was great. Jiang Hai didn't know Mayor Wallace's mood at this time. He just checked once, and there were no problems. The fuel tank was full, and so was the auxiliary fuel tank. After everything was confirmed, Jiang Hai started the boat and headed towards the open sea. Wow, this boat doesn't look big, but it's really good. Sitting next to Jiang Hai, one of the old men smiled and patted the edge of Jiang Hai's boat. Hearing his words, several people next to him nodded. By the way, Jiang Hai, I haven't introduced these old men to you yet. Since I'm free now, let me introduce them to you. Hearing the old men chatting happily, Mayor Wallace also came over and said to Jiang Hai with a smile. This is Gray Gary, a professor of economics at Harvard University. This is Wilcox Arnold, a trader who worked on Wall Street in New York, but now he has retired. He is mainly a consultant. If you want to invest in stocks, well, I won't let you go into the fire pit. Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai also laughed. He knew that he didn't have the fate or luck. Investing in stocks? It's more like cooking. He earned his money 1 cent at a time. He would not use his own money to play such a risky game. Then Mayor Wallace introduced them. These 3 people used to be classmates with Mayor Wallace in college, and they were in the same dormitory. It can be said that their relationship is quite solid. Of course, they studied different majors, so after graduating from college, they went their separate ways. But after all, they were college classmates, so their relationship was still very close. When they were young, they often played together. Later, when they were middle-aged, they began to get busy, so they lost contact. When they were old and had nothing to do, they got in touch again. For the life of these old men, Jiang Hai is still very much in agreement. He estimated that he will be like this in the future. Whether it is in Huaxia or the United States, when a person begins to reminisce about the situation when he was young, it proves that this person is old. The 4 old men around Jiang Hai are naturally old, so reminiscing about the past is inevitable. After the introduction, the 4 of them began to boast about how powerful they were in the past and how they attracted the favor of the young girls. Then the other 3 would refute. If they couldn't refute, they would take the initiative to change the topic. Half an hour later, the beer was cold, so they ate snacks while drinking beer and bragging. After driving for more than 3 hours, Jiang Hai left his fish farm and came to the open sea area. It can't be helped. Jiang Hai's fish farm is too big, and in these 3 hours, these old men just talked most of the time and didn't drink too much. So they are still very sober now. After arriving at the place, they quickly began to get busy. They put the fishing rods on, hooked, and got lead. Jiang Hai also turned on the fish baiting light. At night, it is the time for most fish to hunt for food. Fish have the ability to attract light. When the colorful lights around the hull flashed, the fish under the sea would be attracted by these lights and run to the edge of the boat, making it much easier to catch them. After Old Man God finished setting up the fishing gear at this time, he also opened a big bag that they carried with them. There are a lot of things in it, but the most important thing is the insect repellent light and insect repellent bracelet. He also gave a pair to Jiang Hai. To be honest, in Jiang Hai's opinion, the best way to get rid of insects is 6-God or essential balm. However, maybe foreigners don't like this kind of smell, so few people in the United States sell this kind of stuff. After everything was ready, Jiang Hai also went to the bow and picked up his rather unprofessional fishing rod. After putting on the fishing line, he was ready to fish. Looking at Jiang Hai's movements, the 4 old men couldn't help but laugh. Jiang, although you raise fish, it seems that you don't know how to fish. There is an old saying in Huaxia, sharpening the axe will not delay the cutting of firewood. You don't even have something that suits you, how can you catch fish? The one who spoke was Gray Gary. This old man was a university professor. Naturally, he had a way with words. That's right, look at my things. This is Kevlar's elastic fishing rod. It's very elastic and light. This fishing line is also a good invisible fishing line. No matter how good the fish's eyesight is, they can't see this line. Only with this can you catch good fish. Wilcox Arnold, the wealthiest of the 4, saw that Gary had spoken, so he smiled and said, "That's right. This Wilcox's equipment is really good. Jiang Hai saw a set of fishing equipment. If he bought all of it, it would cost more than $10,000. One must know that this is $10,000, not 10,000 yuan. This means that this set of fishing equipment can be sold for this price in the United States. The price in China can be imagined. He has to admit that these old men are really willing to spend money. Let's try fishing. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai also smiled. Originally, he didn't intend to steal the limelight, but being looked down upon by others is not his style, so he said to the four old men with a smile. Okay, let us teach you how to fish. The two people who catch the least will be responsible for grilling the fish. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the four old men also had an idea and immediately said to Jiang Hai. In their view, the person responsible for grilling the fish is definitely Jiang Hai. As for why it's two people, even if it's the four of them, there will still be a winner. Chapter 547. Jiang, although you have a fish farm, I can tell at a glance that you haven't fished at night. Seeing Jiang Hai sitting there and preparing to fish, Mayor Wallace and the others wouldn't let go of this opportunity to lecture the younger generation. Perhaps they were old and liked to take advantage of their seniority. Of course, Jiang Hai wasn't very disgusted by these old men talking there. They weren't arrogant, nor did they take advantage of their seniority. They were just a little long-winded. Jiang Hai still had to accept it. They were nothing more than looking for a reason to talk. Generally, people of their age, in addition to having common topics with old men of the same age, probably wouldn't have any common topics with young people. This was called a generation gap. Now that they saw a young person like something that they were very good at, they couldn't help but show off. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai just smiled and didn't say anything. Indeed, it was his first time fishing at night, but he didn't think there was any difference. After all, he was no longer the same person he was a year ago. He had fished at least dozens of times this year, and each time, he would catch more than a dozen fish. It could be said that he was already a veteran. Fishing could be said to be a breeze for him. How could he not know anything? However, since they were talking, just let them talk. Jiang Hai didn't want to listen to them. But soon, he knew that in fact, what these old men said still made some sense. Fishing at night was indeed not the same as fishing during the day. Although there were two fishing methods, the hand rod and the sea rod. The sea rod caught big fish, and the hand rod caught bait. However, at night, it was quieter, and the fish would be more daring to eat. Generally, big fish were all intelligent. When they saw bait during the day, they might not come to eat it, but the chances of catching big fish at night were much higher than during the day. In addition, the choice of rod, line, bait, hook, and so on were all very particular. The four old men were all using fake bait, while Jiang Hai was using clam worms, which were the best choice for sea fishing. However, after waiting for about half an hour, the four old men all got some fish, although they were not big, but Jiang Hai didn't get any. The old men hugged the fish and took photos before throwing them back into the sea. They were here to fish, not to catch fish. Therefore, other than the fish they wanted to eat, they would not casually kill other fish. This was also the difference between a real fisherman and an ordinary fishing enthusiast. In the eyes of some fishing enthusiasts, the fish they caught belonged to them. However, in the eyes of these experienced fishermen, these fish belonged to nature. If they wanted to eat it, it would be another matter, but if they didn't want to eat it, there was no need to bring it up. Today's fish is really weird. Jiang Hai said doubtfully as he pulled the fishing rod back and saw that the clam worm was still there. Gray Gary, who was the closest to Jiang Hai, couldn't help but laugh. We told you at the beginning, but you didn't listen. Now you know. Let me tell you, there are two things you did wrong. I guess you won't get anything tonight. First, the clam worm you used is indeed a good tool for sea fishing, but don't forget that it's night now, and there are very few kinds of fish with night vision. In other words, if you throw the clam worm into the water, it won't be able to see it, so how can it be hooked? Also, the float you used is an ordinary float, can you see it sinking? Looking at Jiang Hai, Grey Gary introduced the fish to Jiang Hai. After hearing his words, Jiang Hai was instantly enlightened. He had been raising fish for half a year, so he had some understanding of fish. Most fish indeed didn't have night vision, and their vision was very poor. The reason why they could hunt for food was mainly the movement of the water current and the smell. However, this was the sea, and the waves were moving all the time. Therefore, when the waves surged, the fish's senses would be much weaker. If it was daytime, they could still see the bait, but at night, they really couldn't see the clam silkworm, which was so small. The smell of the clam worm was naturally far worse than the fake bait, so it was inevitable that Jiang Hai couldn't catch it. Unless he changed to real bait, but Jiang Hai never used fake bait or real bait like small fish or shrimps when he went fishing. He only used them after he caught a few, so it was impossible to change the bait now. Looking at the appearance of the old men around him, Jiang Hai was somewhat resentful. These old men didn't say that they wanted to use him as bait. Moreover, Jiang Hai didn't bring any beef with him this time. Would he really have to return empty-handed tonight? Although he was a little depressed, Jiang Hai didn't think of directly using spiritual energy, which was too wasteful. Looking at Jiang Hai continuing to fish with the clam silkworm, the four old men couldn't help but laugh. It seems like their first choice for cooking has been determined. Seeing this, they couldn't help but laugh. They could feel the deep malice of these four old men. Jiang Hai also sighed, he was too useless today. If he knew this would happen, he would have brought some beef back. Just as Jiang Hai's heart was somewhat depressed, suddenly his poles sank, making him unable to help but laugh. Jiang Hai never had any skills when it came to fishing. The moment his fishing rod sank, he straightened it. He wanted to use his powerful strength to pull this guy up, but when he used his strength, he got a fright. To be honest, Jiang Hai had caught a lot of big guys, sharks, tuna, and everything else. However, he had never used so much strength and the fish didn't float to the surface. This was the first time. The fishing line straightened instantly, and Jiang Hai was also reeling in the line. Seeing this scene, the four old men who were talking and laughing at the side couldn't help but be shocked. Is it a big guy? Seeing Jiang Hai reeling in the line, Mayor Wallace knew how strong Jiang Hai was, so he couldn't help but ask in confusion. This fishing line is not moving at all. It doesn't look like he caught a big fish. It looks like he caught something. However, as soon as he said that, God Leslie shook his head and said uncertainly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes. He was very sure that this guy was jealous of him, and Jiang Hai was even more certain in his heart that it should be a big guy. Based on this pulling force, this fish should be more than a ton. More than a ton of fish? If it wasn't a great white shark, then it might be a whale? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai worked even harder. He had never caught a whale before. It turned out that Jiang Hai's fishing line and rod were indeed well matched. Although it wasn't the most expensive, it was indeed quite sturdy. Even with Jiang Hai's great strength, there was no trace of it moving at all. After about 3 minutes, Jiang Hai lost his patience and began to pull harder again. The four old men also surrounded Jiang Hai. With Jiang Hai's roar, the fishing hook under the water was directly pulled out of the water by Jiang Hai. However, when everyone saw what he pulled out, their stomachs were about to explode from laughter. 3 black lines appeared on Jiang Hai's head because it was really as God Leslie said. Jiang Hai really didn't catch a fish, it was a mass of seaweed. Looking at the seaweed in front of them that even the roots were pulled out by Jiang Hai, the 4 old men laughed until tears came out of their eyes. Jiang Hai just stood there. His face was really embarrassed, but he couldn't say anything. TSK, you can't catch a fish with seaweed? Let me use the seaweed to catch one for you. As the saying goes, even if you lose, don't lose. Jiang Hai looked at the seaweed on the ground with a disdainful smile on his face. He then picked up a piece and wrapped the fishing hook directly. Under the mocking gazes of these old men, Jiang Hai threw the fishing hook into the sea, but before throwing it in, he added a trace of spiritual energy to it. Originally, he didn't want to use this thing to bully these old men, but now it seems that if he didn't let them know what a socialistic successor was, they wouldn't know why flowers were so red. It's not that I want to say this, but if you use the seaweed to catch a fish, it'll be our loss, okay? Looking at Jiang Hai's expression, Grey Gary wiped the tears from his laughter and said to Jiang Hai, "You'll regret it." Jiang Hai glanced at the old man. He didn't have much confidence in the seaweed, but he was very confident in the spiritual energy. He believed that the spiritual energy wouldn't let him down. If that's the case. Seeing that Jiang Hai was still stubborn, Wilcox Arnold also clapped his hands and wanted to say something, but before he could finish, Jiang Hai had already exclaimed, "There's a fish." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the four old men once again ran to Jiang Hai's side and looked at Jiang Hai in surprise. At this time, Jiang Hai's fishing line was straight again. Seeing this, the four old men looked at each other. It can't be seaweed again, right? God Leslie, who had already predicted it once, said after hesitating for a while. "No, this time the fishing line is moving, it's indeed a fish." But hearing his words, Mayor Wallace also said, "But why is it moving so slowly?" Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Grey Gary also had some doubts. Listening to their words, Jiang Hai's heart was actually a little drumming because he felt that the strength this time was similar to the last time. It was also a ton of weight, but Jiang Hai didn't know the specifics. He could only slowly retract the fishing line. As the fishing line was pulled out of the sea, a huge dorsal fin appeared in front of Jiang Hai and these old men. Looking at this huge dorsal fin, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Another shark? But this dorsal fin looked a little different from a shark's. Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, Mayor Wallace suddenly shouted with an excited face. He had been here for many years. At first, he was a little confused, but soon he recognized it. "This is a mola, a mola." Mayor Wallace shouted as he pointed at the big fish that was getting closer and closer to the boat. Chapter 548. Sunfish, also known as flipper, mambo, and head fish, was a type of fish in the class Teleost. There were only 3 types in the world. There were very few suborders, but their distribution was very wide. Almost all the tropics, subtropics, and even temperate and cold zones of the world had this type of fish. In the sea, this type of fish was not well known. However, this type of fish still looked very scary. Its body length was only about 3 to 5 meters, but its weight could reach 3.5 tons. This type of fish had been discovered and famous a long time ago because this type of fish could not swim like a normal fish. It only knew how to swim with its fins that looked like small wings. Its tail fin was so small that it could not be seen, so it looked like this type of fish had been cut in half. In the beginning, on the internet in Huaxia, some people called this type of fish strong. However, it was later proven that this type of fish grew up like this. This type of fish was distributed all over the Atlantic Ocean. According to the name in Boston and the United Kingdom, this type of fish was also called the ocean sunfish. The Spanish called it the moonfish, the Germans called it the swimming head, and the islanders called it the mambo. The reason this type of fish was called the sunfish. It was because this type of fish would float up and turn sideways, and sunbathe in the sea, so it was also called the sunfish. This type of fish could be considered the sloth of the ocean. It swam very slowly, basically floating. It was really like rowing a boat without oars, only relying on the waves. However, don't look at this type of fish. It looked strange, ran slowly, and looked like it was easy to catch. This type of fish was indeed easy to catch. However, this type of fish was not an endangered species. There were 2 main reasons. First, this type of fish was really good at reproducing. A female fish could produce 300 million eggs every time it laid eggs. Well, it was no longer a question of whether it could reproduce, but it could reproduce too much. With such a huge amount of eggs, even if the survival rate was 1 in 10 million, it could still survive 30 fish, not to mention it was not that bad. 1 in 10 million could survive 300 fish, which was about the same amount. This was already very scary. And the other reason why this kind of fish was not endangered was that their meat was really too disgusting. As a fish, the sunfish ran so slowly. How did it defend itself? It was mainly due to its tough skin. Its skin was impenetrable, impervious to fire and water. Sharks, sea lions, killer whales, no matter what kind of marine animals it was, could not break its skin. This was its strength. Therefore, generally speaking, the predators in the ocean would not take the initiative to find trouble with the sunfish even if they were hungry because they couldn't bite them at all. At most, some sea lions would bite off their fins to play with them. Mammals were smarter. Not only did they want to eat, but they also wanted to play with them. However, they could only bite off the fins and throw them out of the water like frisbees to play with. The lightest adult mollusk weighed 1.5 tons, and the heavier ones weighed more than 5 tons. No sea lion could lift this kind of fish. Under the thick skin of this kind of fish, its meat was also very unpalatable. It was really disgusting. Humans wouldn't eat this kind of thing anyway. Even the perverted Yamato people kept a respectful distance from this kind of fish. Among humans, there was consumption. That was why they were on the brink of extinction. Just like elephants, bluefin golden spears, sharks. Some people ate these things. There was a market for these things, so people would hunt these things for fun. However, no one ate the sunfish. Moreover, one weighed 5 tons. How many other fish could one catch if they caught one for fun? If fishermen caught this thing, they would cry. Therefore, this kind of fish was not a protected species. However, it had to be admitted that this fish looked quite cute. Compared to its big square face that could be used as an emoji pack, it really complemented its small eyes. Look, you caught a fish. Such a big fish. You lost this time. Although this fish can't be eaten, Jiang Hai still managed to catch a fish. Moreover, it was such a big fish, so he couldn't help but show off a bit. Let's compete in fishing. Are we competing in size, length, or weight? Pulling the fish, Jiang Hai squatted next to the boat and said to the 4 old men with a smirk on his face. Looking at his smirk, the 4 old men looked at each other and said in unison, "Let's compare the number of fish." What a joke. What was the point of comparing weight with this guy? 5 tons of fish, even if their hands were to break, it would still be impossible to catch a fish that weighed 5 tons. This Jiang Hai was really not cute. He even touched the pot that didn't boil. Hearing the shameless words of the 4 old men, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be speechless. Okay, you win. Take a picture. Looking at Jiang Hai's stunned expression, Mayor Wallace also smiled. Then he took a picture of Jiang Hai. After taking the picture, Jiang Hai took out the hook and put the fish back into the sea. This fish was the same as the sea turtles. They both specialized in eating jellyfish. Although jellyfish were also a member of the sea, fishermen like Jiang Hai did not like jellyfish. This was because when jellyfish passed through the sea, not even a blade of grass could grow. Any marine life that could move would become jellyfish's food. And the most important thing was that many jellyfish were poisonous. If you accidentally caught a jellyfish while fishing and were stung, it would be life-threatening. Therefore, these creatures that could deal with jellyfish were very important for fishermen. Of course, there were also some crazy people who would kill sea turtles or mollusks for fun and to sell them. But after all, such crazy people were only a minority. Jiang Hai looked at the mollusks that were gradually sinking to the bottom of the water in front of him. His original depressed mood was swept away. It seems that spiritual energy is still useful. Because he was already confirmed to be the first, no one would compete with him. Then he took a fake bait from Mayor Wallace and began to fish. Jiang Hai's strength was indeed strong. When others were fishing, they had to fight with the fish, but Jiang Hai only had one word. Lift. First, he reeled in the fish and brought it to the surface. Then he lifted it directly. No matter how big the fish was, it couldn't escape. Of course, there was no ridiculously big fish. Big fish also needed to eat big bait. They were not interested in small fish. The fake bait brought by Mayor Wallace and the others were not big. It was not a problem to catch some fish that were 30 to 50 centimeters long. But it was impossible to catch anything that was too big. With the addition of Jiang Hai, the first fish was a barracuda known as a sea wolf. However, compared to the ones caught in the Caribbean Sea, the ones in Boston were much smaller. It was only 70 centimeters long, but it was enough to eat. After the fish was pulled up, Mayor Wallace had already beaten the fish to death. These fish were very aggressive. When they were on the boat, they would be bitten if they caught them with their bare hands. They were only here to play, not to donate blood. It was better to beat them to death. After beating them to death, they threw them into the ice house of the boat. After they finished fishing, they would clean them up and eat them together. They would not put such a big fish back. If they were 10 or 20 years younger, maybe these old men would really fish for the whole night. However, their energy was limited now. After fishing here for about 3 hours, which was around 1:00 in the middle of the night, they were already a little tired. Then everyone discussed and decided to end it for today. After turning off the fish bait light, Jiang Hai drove the boat back to the dock. At the same time, the old men set up an electric grill in the cabin and began to roast the fishes that they caught. The fishes that the old men made tasted very good. Jiang Hai also ate very happily. He ate, drank, and enjoyed the sea breeze. The 4 old men obviously had a good time. If it wasn't for the fact that Mayor Wallace had to drive in a while, maybe he would also drink. When the sun shone on the sea on the first floor, Jiang Hai's boat also arrived in front of his dock. After arriving at the dock, they got off the boat. After tying the boat, the 5 of them rode the 4-wheeled motorcycle back to Jiang Hai's villa. After arriving here, the old men were quite satisfied with tonight's sailing. Although they were sleepy and tired, they still kept giving Jiang Hai a thumbs up. Speaking of which, they haven't been so happy in a long time. Mayor Wallace, who was able to show his face in front of his old friends, was also proud at this time. He was obviously proud to be able to make his old friends so happy. After chatting for a while, the 4 old men got into the car driven by Mayor Wallace and left Jiang Hai's house. After the 4 of them left, Jiang Hai couldn't help but yawn. He then slowly walked into the villa and gently closed the door. He signaled with his eyes that Jiang Hai and Xiao Bai, who had woken up, to go back to sleep. Jiang Hai then went upstairs. Since these little guys became familiar with this place, they didn't go to Jiang Hai's room to sleep. Instead, they preferred to stay in the hall on the first floor. It was bigger here, and they didn't have to wait for Jiang Hai to open the door in the morning. So they had been sleeping here for a long time. When they saw that it was Jiang Hai, they lowered their heads again and continued to sleep. Jiang Hai returned to his room, but as soon as he walked in, he found that someone was lying on his bed at this time. As the rising sun shone on the person's face, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be speechless. Because he knew this person, Paige Hall. It seemed that the one who was going to find him in the hot spring tonight should be her. "You're back, do you want to take a bath?" Hearing the sound of the door closing, Paige Hall, who was sleeping, rubbed her eyes. After seeing that it was Jiang Hai, she couldn't help but ask Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. "Together? Okay." Chapter 549. "Hey, Paige, I heard that you're not feeling well today. How are you? Are you feeling better?" Inside the winery, Dulles Gerard couldn't help but smile when he saw Paige Hall walking over. He had been working with these girls for half a year. To be honest, Dulles wasn't satisfied with these girls at first because he felt that they had never done this before. They were clumsy, and he heard that they weren't very disciplined in the past. According to his understanding, these girls might be Jiang Hai's personal cough. With this layer of relationship, coupled with his prejudice against women, he felt that God knows how well they would take care of the grapes. So at first, Dulles was a little dissatisfied with these girls, and his words were a little harsh. But what surprised him was that these girls all endured it. Although they didn't know anything at first, they did a good job later. Whether it was taking care of the grapes, removing insects, watering, etc., they all did a good job. In his opinion, the reason why these grapes could grow so well was inseparable from the girls' care. Of course, what he didn't know was that it was mainly due to the spiritual energy. Dulles Gerard, who didn't have any children, also regarded these girls as his daughters and granddaughters, and usually took care of them. Today, when Aphrodite came, Paige, who lived with Hilda, had a headache. So when she rested at home for a day, she was still a little worried, but fortunately, she came over in the afternoon. Oh. It's much better. Hearing Dulles Gerard's words, Paige Hall nodded a little awkwardly. Only she knew that she didn't have a headache or anything like that, but, how is it? Did you succeed? Looking at Paige, who came over to help, Dana Taylor quietly walked over and whispered to her. Hearing her words, Paige looked around and nodded shyly. Hey, well done. How many times did you and Jiang do it? Looking at Paige's appearance, Dana Taylor smiled, then clenched her fist and punched her palm. Then, as if she felt that her action was a little too big, she immediately retracted her hand and continued to whisper to Paige. Normally, I seem to do it 3 times, Jiang Hai once, then in the mouth and behind, and Jiang Hai once. I can't remember. Hearing Dana's words, although Paige's face was very red, she still hesitated for a moment and said to Dana, Wow. Wow, to have such results in the first battle, it's really worth celebrating. I saw Aphrodite go to find Shara at noon, it should be her tonight. Sigh, Jiang Hai didn't come over, I'm missing him again. Hearing Paige's words, Dana's eyes lit up, but then she sighed. Jiang Hai didn't come today, it seemed that she had to wait for something to happen. Well, I miss him a little too. Hearing Dana Taylor's words, Paige Hall also raised her head and looked at Jiang Hai's villa in the distance. At this time, Jiang Hai was sleeping soundly in the villa. On the other side, Bernice, who was helping, was looking at Paige Hall and Dana Taylor. Although she didn't know what these women were doing, her sixth sense told her that these women were up to no good, and this matter might be related to Jiang Hai. Although she had fallen asleep last night, she vaguely seemed to have heard something. She glanced at Daliana and Marian next to her. These 2 little girls probably knew something, but although they were very close to her, they were in the same trench as Aphrodite. Looks like I have to check it out. Bernice muttered softly and lowered her head. Sister? What did you just say? Xiaoya whispered to Bernice, probably because she heard Bernice's words. Oh. It's nothing. It's fine to tell you. I feel that something different has happened between Aphrodite and Jiang Hai recently, so I'm going to check it out. If you have any clues, remember to tell me, but don't tell Delina and Marian, they're most likely in cahoots with Aphrodite. Originally, Bernice was not prepared to tell Xiaoya, but after thinking about it, she was a little weak, so it was better to find another person to help. Jiang Hai, Aphrodite, and the others? Well, I understand, sister. Hearing Bernice's words, Xiaoya was a little confused, but she still nodded in agreement. Then they continued to work. Without Jiang Hai, the work that could have been done in the morning was finished in the evening. Now all the ripe grapes in the vineyard had been harvested. These grapes would be brewed into wine. According to Dulles Gerard's feeling, the grapes harvested these days, if used to make wine, could be brewed into about 100,000 bottles. Although 100,000 bottles was not a lot for such a large vineyard, after all, this was only an initial attempt. According to the time, after this autumn, winter, and next spring storage, the new wine next year should be able to try participating in wine competitions around the world. For Dulles Gerard, he disdained to participate in some small competitions. He would only participate in the top-level competitions. He had participated in the top 4 wine tasting competitions in the world. And he had also won awards. This time, he felt that the wine he brewed might have some problems with the sugar fermentation. But other than the dry red wine, he was still quite confident in the other types of wine. According to his thinking, the new wine for the new year should not be a problem to get into the top 10. If the opportunity was good, it could even win a small award. This could be considered as the initial opening of sales. As he packed up, he studied the wine tasting that he could participate in next year. Currently, the 4 most authoritative international wine competitions in the world were the Brussels International Wine Competition, the Maguin Wine Competition, the Bordeaux Aquitaine Wine Competition, and the Wine International Grand Prix. In addition to these 4 competitions, there was also the Japan International Wine Challenge, which was specially for Asia. It was also very famous recently. But Dulles was not prepared to participate in this competition. He knew that his boss was not very interested in this country. As for the first 4 competitions, if the timing was arranged, the Brussels and Maguin wine competition would be very good. One was in April, and the other was in May. But everything had to wait until the new wine was brewed and he tasted it. After all the grapes were harvested, they removed the vines and threw the grapes into the wooden bucket as usual. Then, Bernice, Xiaoya, Daliana, and Marion jumped into the bucket and started to work until everything was done. The sun had already set. While they were busy, Jiang Hai was sleeping comfortably on the bed. Awoo. Just as he was sleeping soundly, his cell phone suddenly rang. When he heard the phone ring, Jiang Hai was startled. He looked at the phone in a daze. He didn't sleep last night, and he was busy for a while this morning, so it was natural for him to feel a little sleepy. So he slept from this morning until now. If it wasn't for the phone ringing, he might have continued to sleep. Hello? Jiang Hai put the phone next to his ear and said to the other side of the phone. Hello, is this Jiang Hai? The phone connected, and a familiar Mandarin voice came from the other end of the phone. Oh, it's me, Yunfei, what's up? When he heard the familiar voice, Jiang Hai wiped his face and looked at the caller ID. Huang Yunfei. This person might be unfamiliar, but Jiang Hai was very familiar with him. He was his childhood friend who worked in the hospital. When he came back to China, he would come and play with them. Is it night over there? Are you still sleeping? No, isn't it only 12 hours? Listening to Jiang Hai's weak voice, Huang Yunfei on the other side of the phone asked curiously. At this time, it was 6:00 in the morning in Huaxia. He deliberately called Jiang Hai at this time. Oh, I went fishing last night. I didn't sleep all night, so I made up for it during the day. What's the matter? Rubbing his eyes, Jiang Hai glanced at his watch. It was indeed getting dark. He sat up and asked Jiang Hai. Well, I don't know if it's convenient for you. I'm getting married in November. Do you have time to come back? After hesitating for a moment, Huang Yunfei said to Jiang Hai. After so many years of friends, it was impossible for him to not tell Jiang Hai about his marriage. Whether Jiang Hai came back or not was his business. Hey. You're getting married. Congratulations. Is it with that? When is it? Hearing Huang Yunfei on the other end of the phone say that he was getting married, Jiang Hai woke up in an instant. He immediately said it twice and then asked with some doubts. Ahem, what do you mean by that? I only have one girlfriend. October 4th, Sunday, August 22nd of the lunar calendar. Do you have time to come back? Listening to Jiang Hai's words, Huang Yunfei on the other side immediately changed the topic. It seemed that the bride-to-be was by his side. When Jiang Hai heard what he said, he did not expose him but laughed. This Huang Yunfei, Jiang Hai still knew very well. Because his family studied medicine and was also in the hospital where he was, after graduating from college, he first became a nurse and then a doctor. When he was a nurse, he went directly into the operating room. When he first started working, his income was quite good. Later, he relied on his connections to get a doctor's qualification certificate from a nurse. Instead, he was a little more relaxed. Although he would still perform surgery, it was more to get his qualifications. Qualifications were very important in the country at all times. Of course, what was more important than qualifications was prospects. Chapter 550. Hospitals. Generally speaking, in the hearts of adult men, there were always two sides to hospitals. Firstly, it was a serious place to save lives. Secondly, it was because of some Japanese literary romance and action idol dramas. Therefore, when hospitals and nurses were mentioned, there would always be a feeling of a train passing through a cave. Sob, 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 sob. After all, everyone had a cup of tea, a glass of wine, a computer, and a hand in their youth. Even Jiang Hai would appreciate it from time to time. There were many serious stories that happened in the hospital. For example, there were ancient animations that old drivers often appeared in. There were also some nurses in the animations. Cough, the hospitals in China were naturally not like some movies or animations. However, the level of the staff was indeed a little too liberal. Of course, no matter where it was, there would be good people and bad people. This was inevitable. Huang Yunfei couldn't be considered a good person, but he couldn't be considered a bad person either. He was rich and good-looking. He was more than 180 centimeters tall and had some back view at home. He was indeed quite popular with women. Jiang Hai knew that when he was in medical assistant school, he had already changed girlfriends 4 times. He had also messed around with others dozens of times. Basically, it was with different people every time. How did Jiang Hai know? Because this guy was really something. He actually took photos of all of them and even showed them off to Jiang Hai and the others. He really deserved to die. After that, for the sake of his reputation, he only spent some money and went to the bar to look for girls for a night. He could be considered to have a fixed girlfriend. However, when he had a girlfriend, he would still secretly go out and look for a few girls. For example, when he went for a meeting or went to the office for a meal, it depended on who he was talking to at night. If it was a male colleague, the two of them would go out and spend money to look for professional women to learn from each other. If it was a female colleague, they would go to the hotel to talk about work. He did not know if it was because of the pressure in this line of work or because they were rich and had nothing to do. Anyway, from Jiang Hai's perspective, it was indeed quite messy. In the end, he and his girlfriend broke up and reconciled because of 3rd place, 4th place, 5th place, and so on. Before Jiang Hai came to the United States last year, he had just confirmed that he had broken up with his girlfriend. In less than a week, he found another teacher in the school. It was said that someone introduced him to her. As for whether he was married to her now, Jiang Hai was not sure. Sure, no problem. Anyway, he was going back to China during the Mid-Autumn Festival. It didn't matter if he stayed for a few more days to attend a wedding. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled and agreed. After all, the two of them were relatively close. When Jiang Hai's family was in trouble, his friends wanted to help Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai didn't agree. Other people's money will always belong to other people. You can't touch other people's money because of your own family's affairs. Jiang Hai was quite stubborn and quite stubborn. Perhaps it couldn't be seen now, but 2 years ago, he was very stubborn. When his family was in trouble, people like Fu Yuan and Huang Yunfei all said that if he needed help, he could ask them for help. However, Jiang Hai would rather sell his house than borrow money from others. He would rather starve to death than borrow money from others. He was a person who didn't have the bone to borrow money from others. When he was in school, he would forget to bring money for food. If he forgot to bring money, he would starve. He would never borrow money from others. If he didn't have money to buy water, he would thirst and endure it. Logically speaking, friends shouldn't be like this, but Jiang Hai was such a person. He was used to enduring everything by himself. He wasn't used to complaining about being poor in front of others. He just liked to endure it. Fortunately, Chi Li's mother helped him back then. Otherwise, who knew what would happen to Jiang Hai now? Then when are you coming back? Huang Yunfei didn't expect Jiang Hai to agree when he made this call. However, he didn't expect that Jiang Hai would really come back to attend his wedding. Huang Yunfei was also quite moved for a while. He immediately asked Jiang Hai. Needless to say, his old friend specially came back from the United States to attend his wedding, so he must treat him well. I'll probably be back on October 2nd or 3rd. I'll call you then. He calculated in his heart. The Mid-Autumn Festival was on September 27th. He heard that Ai Xiaoxi's home was in Lu Province. She would probably be there for at least a few days. Even if he could leave on the 11th, there probably wouldn't be tickets or something like that. After all, there would be quite a lot of people. Since the country started to waive highway fares on holidays, the number of people who went out to play these days had increased. If he went back at that time, he would probably be stuck on the highway. He could leave on the 2nd as it was faster to take a plane. Okay, let's get together when you come back. Hearing that Jiang Hai had set the date, Huang Yunfei on the other side also said with a smile. After finalizing the date of going to the wedding on the 11th, Jiang Hai also hung up the phone and looked at the discussion groups in his WeChat. He was really too busy in the past few days and the news had already spread. Throwing the phone on the bed, Jiang Hai also sat up. After wiping his face, he went to the bathroom to wash up. When he came out, Little Ye and the others were already preparing food in the living room on the first floor. Hey! Jiang Hai, you're up. Seeing Jiang Hai coming down, Aphrodite and the others said immediately. That's right. What a good sleep. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also smiled and looked at Page Hall over there. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Page Hall blushed and turned her head away. No one knows better than her why Jiang Hai slept for so long. Are you going to take a shower later? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Dana Taylor couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai and ask. In a while, go ahead. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't need to think too much to understand what she meant. Men's physiological conditions are like this. Even if they just did something before going to bed at night, they will have such an impulse after waking up. Now hearing Dana's words, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite also looked at Sheila Rodney in the distance. It should be her tonight. Hearing Jiang Hai and Aphrodite's words, Bernice, who had felt that there must be something between them since the day, couldn't help but frown. Her sixth sense told her that something must have happened if they were going to take a shower later. It's just that she wasn't quite sure what would happen now, but that didn't mean she wouldn't go and see. Dinner was over just like that. Winthrop in September was still quite hot. After eating a meal, Jiang Hai was sweating all over. Without saying anything, they went straight to the hot spring and prepared to take a shower. Everything was similar to the situation a few days ago. Jiang Hai took a shower first, while Aphrodite and the others took a shower in the women's bathroom. After a tiring day, to be honest, anyone would feel a little tired. After soaking in the hot spring, they felt even more tired. While everyone was taking a shower, they only saw Aphrodite nod to Sheila Rodney, and the latter quietly went ashore. Watching her leave, Bernice also made a mental note, but on the surface, she still pretended as if nothing had happened and soaked there. After about 10 minutes, she quietly went ashore. She wanted to see where Sheila Rodney went. But after looking around the women's bathroom, she didn't find Sheila Rodney's whereabouts. She also looked in the bathroom, and most importantly, Sheila Rodney's clothes were still here, which meant that she didn't change her clothes and leave. This made Bernice a little curious. Maybe a woman's sixth sense was really accurate. Unknowingly, she walked out of the women's bathroom and then came to the men's bathroom. Looking inside, Bernice's pupils unconsciously dilated in an instant. In her eyes, Sheila Rodney, who had disappeared for more than 10 minutes, was in the men's bathroom changing room. Her hands were on the wardrobe in front of her, and her whole body was red. Jiang Hai was holding her waist. There was no need to say what they were doing. Looking at the scene in front of her, Bernice subconsciously wanted to rush in and question Jiang Hai, but suddenly she remembered, if she went, what would she say? In what capacity would she say it? Bernice and Lilia are not as simple as they seem on the surface. They have their own secrets, and this secret, they are not ready to tell Jiang Hai, but if she rushed in now, then this secret would definitely be exposed. Thinking of this, Bernice's footsteps couldn't help but slow down. Then she stood by the door and looked at the two people inside through the crack of the door. At this moment, as Sheila Rodney's body shook, Jiang Hai also carried her back to the soft chair she sat on when she changed clothes and continued to attack. There was no way to say it. Bernice already understood this matter. She should have left here, but looking at the scene in front of her, her footsteps were a little stagnant. To be honest, although she was not young, she had not experienced this before. Looking at the action in front of her, she was very shy, but she could not move her feet. About half an hour later, as Bernice's body shook, her originally somewhat confused eyes returned to calmness. She glanced at Jiang Hai, who was still fighting in the room, and slowly walked back to the bathroom. When she soaked in the water, she couldn't help but want to close her eyes like before, but every time she closed her eyes, the scene just now would subconsciously appear in her mind, which made her very helpless and passive. Damn Jiang Hai! Bernice muttered in a low voice. Whenever she saw Jiang Hai in, she would feel very uncomfortable, but she didn't have the right to stop Jiang Hai. However, if she didn't have the right to do so, it wasn't impossible to use other methods. Chapter 551. Woo, it's so comfortable to sleep. After stretching, Jiang Hai slowly sat up from his white jade bed. In the beginning, when he slept on this bed, it was indeed painful. Jiang Hai was used to sleeping on a soft bed since he was a child. He was really not used to this hard bed. However, after so many days, after getting used to it, sleeping on this bed was really quite comfortable. After getting up, not only did the speed of absorbing aura increase a lot. And the most important thing was that because it was a hard bed, his neck and waist did not hurt. He slept very comfortably. Throwing the towel on his body aside casually, Jiang Hai walked directly into the bathroom in his underwear. He turned on the tap and looked at himself in the mirror in front of him. Unknowingly, his beard grew a little longer. He washed his face, brushed his teeth, then made foam on his mouth, and shaved it with a razor. After 10 minutes, Jiang Hai returned to his most clean and tidy appearance. As for things like facial cleanser, Jiang Hai never used it. After showing a bright smile to himself in the mirror, a new day had arrived. Casually putting on the big vest and big underwear that he wore in the manor, Jiang Hai walked out of the villa step by step. But just as he walked to the door, he saw Bernice, who had finished her exercise, coming in from outside. At this time, she was wearing a tight black shirt on her upper body, just like what women usually wear when exercising in movies and TV dramas. In fact, it was just a slightly bigger vest. Ahem, when Jiang Hai said vest, everyone should be able to understand what it was. It was the kind of vest with the word grass on it. Her lower abdomen was completely exposed, and there were some fine beads of sweat on it. Her lower body was also wearing a pair of very tight shorts. It was about the same length as the average hot pants, but Jiang Hai did not see it. Two straight and slender thighs were exposed. Her long hair was neatly tied behind her head. At this time, she was wiping her sweat while taking out the headphones in her ears. When she saw Jiang Hai coming downstairs, she couldn't help but be stunned. Have you been living too comfortably recently? You're not working today, and you're not going out for a run? After being stunned for a moment, Bernice ignored Jiang Hai, walked past him, and went to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of fresh milk, and drank it. This milk was produced by the cows raised in other manors nearby. Although there were many calves in Jiang Hai's manor, they were still very young. However, Jiang Hai was not interested in the milk of Angus cows. He was more interested in their meat. Forget about the milk. As for raising some cows, Jiang Hai had also considered it. However, he did not have any thoughts about raising a large number of cows. It was not bad to raise a few for himself to drink. In a few days, he had an appointment with Robbins Garcia to purchase this year's cattle. When the time came, he would just have to pick a few cows. Although Bernice was drinking in small sips, it did not take long for her to finish half of it before she stopped. Hey, it's a run. If I wake up early, I'll go for a run. If I don't feel like running, then forget it. Scratching his belly, Jiang Hai sat on the sofa in the living room a little dispirited. He casually turned on the TV and started to watch it. In the early morning, there was really nothing. Other than some morning news, there were only some TV series replays. Recently, Jiang Hai had been watching TV series here. He still had some love for American TV series. When he was in China, he also watched American TV series, but to be honest, he did not like it very much because the plot of the protagonist in the American TV series was too weak. The most serious movie was probably a Prison Break, but it went astray by the time the third movie was filmed. The Walking Dead, known as the Doomsday Survival Guide, made the male lead quite depressed. The first episode was NTR. Jiang Hai couldn't stand this kind of film, so he didn't watch it. Later, he heard that the male lead had lost one of his hands. Jiang Hai expressed that he really did not like this kind of TV series where the protagonist was not invincible. And before he came here, the most popular American TV series in China should be regarded as a game of power. This American TV series was indeed quite interesting. The scenes were good, and it felt that the money to make one TV series was enough to make a movie in China. The rhythm was clear, and the imagination was not small. Who knows when one of the main characters would die? Most of all, this film was still a little, not suitable for people of all stages to watch. In the first episode, the king's wife and her brother were in the tower. It really attracted the attention of the otakus. However, after watching a few episodes, Jiang Hai lost interest. Because he watched the first few episodes, he did not figure out whether the protagonist was the illegitimate son or his father. Jiang Hai felt a lot of pressure, so he did not watch it later. After coming to the United States, he found that there were really a lot of American TV series. Now, when he was bored, he would watch them. The TV series he mainly watched were DC's superhero, Green Arrow, vampires, and Falling Stars. Now the TV series was Falling Stars, and this TV series was also about the apocalypse, but it was not about zombies. Instead, it was about the apocalypse where aliens invaded. The action effects were done very well, at least much better than the 50-cent special effects in China. What's the point of watching these things? Do you have something to do tonight? If you have nothing to do, accompany me to watch a movie. Looking at Jiang Hai sitting there watching the TV series, Bernice, who was holding milk, came over, glanced at the TV, and said to Jiang Hai, "Watch a movie." "What movie? Is there anything you want to watch?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. This was because Jiang Hai hadn't seen a movie for a long time. The last time he saw a movie, it was with his buddies. It had been many years, and at that time, his parents hadn't had an accident yet. Later, his parents had an accident, so he was not in the mood to watch movies anymore. Unknowingly, a long time had passed. Now that Bernice mentioned it, Jiang Hai was also stunned for a moment, because he was also a little interested. "I don't know, let's go and see it before we decide." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice directly rolled her eyes at him and said. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai snorted. "It's okay to watch a movie, but I don't know what time she picked." After watching TV for a while, Jiang Hai got up and made some breakfast. When breakfast was ready, Delina, Marion, Lilia, and Bernice, who had just gone back to sleep, also woke up. Everyone had a good meal. During breakfast, Jiang Hai also mentioned that Bernice was going to watch a movie, but unfortunately, Lilia had no interest in those dirty places. Delina and Marian told Jiang Hai that there were no movies they liked to watch recently, so they didn't want to go. In the end, only Jiang Hai and Bernice decided to go. Jiang Hai just shrugged his shoulders. After everyone had breakfast, Jiang Hai and the others set off for the winery. Although they didn't need to collect and step on grapes anymore, they still wanted to go and see if there was anything they could help with. After arriving, they basically did some small things according to Dulles Gerard's instructions, that's all. At the same time, Jiang Hai also told Aphrodite that he was going to watch a movie with Bernice in the evening. Aphrodite didn't say anything about this. Jiang Hai only hoped that she understood his words. After eating lunch at the winery, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the manor, in order not to let their evening life be occupied too much. Jiang Hai originally proposed to go in the afternoon, but Bernice said that she still had an article to edit and would wait until the evening. Unknowingly, night fell. At 5:00 in the evening, Bernice came out of the room and had dinner with Jiang Hai and the others. After that, Jiang Hai drove his car and took Bernice to the movie theater in Winthrop Town. In the United States, the marketing model for movies had been around for a long time. In the United States, theaters were basically private. As long as there were people, they would open a movie theater. Compared to watching movies at home, Americans were more accustomed to going to the movie theater to watch movies. This was also the difference in consumer awareness. Of course, the young people in Huaxia also preferred to go to the movie theater to watch movies, but how many people over 50 years old could you see in movies? People like Jiang Hai's parents rarely went to the movie theater. In their opinion, it was not worth it to spend money to watch movies. However, in the United States, from the old to the young, they really liked going to the movie theater to watch movies. There were thousands of people in Winthrop, so naturally, there were cinemas here. Originally, there were only 2 cinemas. One was smaller and cheaper, while the other was bigger and more expensive. The films shown inside were also different. The bigger one mainly showed blockbusters. Basically, it would show whatever was popular in North America and had just been released. As for the smaller one, it mainly earned money from young people because most of the seats were for couples. Most importantly, the movies that were shown were for people over 50 years old, whose hearts could not stand it, and those under 18 were forbidden to watch. The flow of customers was different, so it was not a loss. However, there were a lot of tourists coming in this month, which made many businesses interested in Winthrop. The other day, Mayor Wallace said that recently, they were talking about a large theater chain moving into Winthrop. Jiang Hai was not sure about the details, but he felt that he could collect rent again. After Jiang Hai and Bernice left the manor, they went to the big movie theater in Winthrop. Although they were a man and a woman, they were really not in that kind of relationship. Why would they go to the small movie theater? When they arrived at the big movie theater, they found that there were many people here. In addition to the locals, there were also many tourists and Huaxia tourists. After all, American movies in Huaxia had to be imported. There was a limit to the number of movies that could be imported each year. Some movies could not be imported, such as the famous War of the Zombies. However, movies like this could be seen here. Chapter 552. Of course, other than these normal movies, there are many other movies. Speaking of other movies, Jiang Hai had to admit that Japan could be said to be the #1 movie in the world when it came to love, art, romance, action, and occasional dramas. Europe and the United States were also completely incomparable to them. They were the most beautiful people in the movie industry. But recently, South Korea's movies are not so explicit, and the 3 movies with plots are quite good. Most importantly, the female leads have good figures and are very beautiful. According to Prawalton, you don't care if she had plastic surgery or not. It's not asking you to marry her. It's just watching a movie. Although it's not so direct, it's quite good. These movies are also shown in theaters, but it's mostly in small theaters. Jiang Hai had also watched paid channels at home. For example, he likes Forbidden Love, Kind Sister-in-Law, Women's Struggle, Neighbors, Delicious Stewardesses, Charming Nannies, Cough. As an experienced driver, it's understandable for him to race from time to time. For example, Jiang Hai is now speeding to the cinema. After parking his car in the cinema's parking lot, Jiang Hai walks into the cinema. When he walks in, almost everyone who sees Jiang Hai greets him. "Hi, Jiang, are you here to watch a movie?" "Hi, Jiang, is this your girlfriend?" "Hi, Jiang, how are you recently?" Hearing these greetings, Jiang Hai smiles and talks to them one by one. But when they talk about his girlfriend, Jiang Hai will say, "No, she's just my friend." But it is undeniable that Bernice can see how popular Jiang Hai is here. It can be said that in Winthrop, Jiang Hai's reputation has been raised to the max. The two of them greeted each other while waiting in line. It didn't take long for them to reach the front of the cinema because they hadn't decided what to watch before coming here. So, after coming here, they did not book tickets online and went directly to the counter to buy tickets. While they were queuing, they also took a look at the film schedule. To be honest, there really weren't any good films to watch now. The cinema wasn't small, so there were quite a lot of movies. However, there weren't many that were really worth watching. Currently, there were a total of 20 recommended films. They were hanging on the side with the North American box office rankings. At the top of the list was War Room. This movie had been very popular recently, but Jiang Hai and Bernice weren't interested in it. This was because it was about a struggling family. They learned from a wise old woman and walked out of a difficult situation. Many strivers in the United States might like this movie, but Jiang Hai and Bernice weren't strivers. In second place, Rush Out of Compton was a romantic musical. In third place, A Walk in the Woods was about an old man who wanted to travel all over the United States. In fourth place, Jiang Hai had not watched the first, second, and third, so he was not interested. In fifth place, Disc Within a Disc 5, Mysterious Country. Jiang Hai was like Disc Within a Disc. To be honest, Disc Within a Disc had always been very popular. However, Jiang Hai really hadn't watched this series and the 007 series. At most, he had seen some tidbits, so he wasn't interested. After that, Jiang Hai wasn't interested in Nowhere to Run, Secret Agent, Sinister 2, Rooster with Many Eggs, etc. The only thing that interested Jiang Hai was Ant-Man, which had been in theaters for 8 weeks, and Fake Jurassic World, which had been in theaters for 13 weeks. Well, bringing a girl to watch these two movies, if it wasn't true love, then it was really loveless. Ant-Man, Jurassic World, Secret Agent, and Minion, which one do you want to watch? Before Jiang Hai could speak, Bernice, who had been queuing beside him, couldn't help but ask Jiang Hai. Hearing that her choice was the same as his, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. "I won't watch the later cartoons." "The first two, which one do you want to watch?" Ant-Man was one of Marvel's heroes. Jiang Hai had also done Avengers before. The full name was The Rich Avengers. Ant-Man was one of the heroes in Marvel World, but obviously, his standalone movie was not only for the box office, but also to add it to the later plot of Avengers. As a man, Jiang Hai was still interested in Marvel's heroes. As for Jurassic Park, generally speaking, boys would like dinosaurs when they were young, and Jiang Hai was the same. Even when he was in his 20s, he still liked dinosaurs, so he had watched Jurassic Park 1, 2, and 3. Although in addition to 1, 2, and 3 were quite bad, especially 3. The first 2/3 of the game were just eggs, and there wasn't even a bird. However, the Tyrannosaurus Rex and Spinosaurus Rex were quite interesting. This time, Jiang Hai was also quite interested in the Jurassic World. However, he had been busy for a while and didn't have time to watch it. Watching it now was also a good choice. Then Jurassic World it is. Although it has been released for 13 weeks, there is no such movie on the internet, so Bernice has not seen it. After hesitating for a moment, she decided to watch it. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also shrugged his shoulders in agreement. The two bought 2 tickets to Jurassic World, then bought 2 large cups of Coke, and a large bucket of popcorn. After waiting for a while, they went in to watch the movie. However, after walking into the movie hall, they felt that they had been cheated. This movie has been released for 13 weeks. Generally speaking, when a movie is released, the main money earned is in the first month, that is, the money earned in the first 4 weeks, and the money earned in the last 4 weeks is the money earned. Ordinary movies are released in the first 2 months and 8 weeks. But this Jurassic World has been released for 13 weeks, and it can be said that almost everyone has seen it. It hasn't been released yet, mainly because the box office is so good, and some people want to watch it a second time. But these people are in the minority after all, so after Jiang Hai and Bernice walked into the theater, the whole theater was empty. Sitting in the middle of the 6th row, the two looked around with the 3D glasses that were given when they entered the theater. Don't tell me they booked the whole place. Looking at the empty hall, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Fortunately, it was impossible for the theater to only sell 2 tickets at a time. After Jiang Hai's voice fell, some people walked into the theater. Most of these people were a man and a woman. After walking in, they moved to the last row or some corners. Jiang Hai didn't have any opinion about this. After all, not everyone is willing to sit in the middle, but to be honest, for a movie with 3D special effects, sitting in the middle is the most comfortable. Soon, about 10 or so people came in, and no one else came in. As the lights dimmed, the movie also began. The first scene of the movie was a dinosaur egg hatching, then it was a couple who were about to divorce. In order to make time for their divorce, they let their 2 children play with their aunt first, and then they entered the plot. Jiang Hai has never seen this movie before, so he watched it very seriously, and so did Bernice. Although she called Jiang Hai out, mainly because she didn't want to see Jiang Hai fighting with others in the bathroom. But since they are here to watch a movie, she still watched it very seriously. The two ate a bucket of popcorn together. Their hands and other things would touch from time to time, but the two didn't care. After all, this is considered normal contact. When the male lead appeared and began to train the velociraptor, a strange sound entered Jiang Hai's ears. It seemed to be the sound of saliva. This made him frown. He turned his head and looked at the place where the sound came from. However, when he looked over, he was almost scared to death. Because at this moment, at the place where the voice came from, he saw the man and woman who had just entered sitting there. The woman was lying on the man's lap, and the voice came from there. Jiang Hai was also an adult. He heard the sound of water last night, but when he saw this scene, he was stunned. Everyone knows that Americans are bold, but they shouldn't be this bold. This is so blatant. This scene shocked Jiang Hai so much that he was no longer in the mood to watch the movie. He just kept looking over there. After watching for a while, a low moaning sound came from the back row. Looking over, he saw a figure moving up and down. Needless to say, Jiang Hai also knew that the people behind were no longer satisfied with just the foreplay. They started to use real swords and spears. No wonder these guys took the initiative to sit in the corner after coming in, so this is the reason. What are you watching? Can't you watch a movie? At this time, probably feeling that Jiang Hai's gaze wasn't on the screen, Bernice also turned her head and said to Jiang Hai while looking behind her. Although her eyesight wasn't as good as Jiang Hai's, it wasn't bad. Seeing the movements of the people behind her, she didn't react at first. After all, she didn't experience this before, but when she reacted, her face suddenly turned red. Cough, watch the movie, watch the movie. Feeling that Bernice also noticed it, Jiang Hai couldn't help but cough, then forced himself to turn around and look at the movie screen. As for Bernice, she also turned around and looked at the screen in front of her. However, it was difficult for the two of them to fully focus on what was happening. Those strange sounds seemed to be constantly circling around their ears, and they just couldn't get rid of them. They were even louder than the sound of a movie. Almost at the same time, the two decided to distract themselves. There were many ways to distract people, and eating was one of them. So the two stretched out their hands almost at the same time to get the popcorn on Bernice's side, but when they took the popcorn, their hands unconsciously touched it, and they quickly retracted it as if they were pricked by a needle. Chapter 553. Although there was no more physical contact, the atmosphere between the two was getting weirder and weirder. They just sat there like that. It was not right to look, it was not right to not look, it was not right to eat, and it was not right to not eat. The awkward atmosphere almost solidified between the two. If it wasn't because this was a movie theater, it was dark, and they couldn't see, maybe the two would be embarrassed. In this way, probably after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, when Jiang Hai's hand touched the popcorn again, it touched Bernice's hand again. But this time, when Jiang Hai wanted to pull his hand back as if he got an electric shock, Bernice suddenly grabbed Jiang Hai's hand, which made Jiang Hai stunned. What is she doing? Don't move, I'm holding your wrist. Bernice didn't know if it was because she felt a little awkward holding Jiang Hai's hand, or maybe she didn't know why she was holding Jiang Hai's hand. At this time, she could only say something that sounded like a joke. Hearing this, Jiang Hai was also amused. He took out his other hand and grabbed Bernice's wrist. I'm also holding your wrist. Hearing Jiang Hai's words in her ear, Bernice didn't know what to do for a while. Just like that, the two of them held each other's wrists and pretended to be watching a movie. However, all they could hear was a series of special sounds. Unknowingly, the movie also came to an end. When the lights of the movie theater were turned on, the two people here reacted and immediately let go of each other's hands. Then they left the movie theater without looking back. Walking to the door of the movie theater, Bernice still stood there and didn't dare to look at Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also touched his hair and looked around at a loss. Cough, let's go back. After waiting for about 2 or 3 minutes, Jiang Hai said courageously. Well, okay. Hearing that Jiang Hai wanted to go back, Bernice didn't refuse. She nodded directly and said to Jiang Hai. Now we can go back and take a shower, and then go to bed. Looking at the time, it was already more than 8 o'clock, almost 9 o'clock. Jiang Hai said subconsciously, but when it came to taking a shower, Bernice's confused mind instantly woke up. She immediately took a step forward and took Jiang Hai's arm directly. Huh? Feeling Bernice's action, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at her curiously. What is this little girl going to do? It's still too early to go back now, let's go shopping, let's go to Winthrop. Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, Bernice, and then she quickly pulled Jiang Hai to go out. Although he didn't know why she wanted to take him shopping, since he was already here, Jiang Hai didn't want to be disappointed. He smiled and followed Bernice to the shopping mall in Winthrop. He didn't know if the two had forgotten, but Bernice held Jiang Hai's hand and didn't let go. The two were like a real couple, shopping in the commercial street built by Winthrop. Speaking of which, although Jiang Hai was the largest shareholder of this street, he really hadn't been here before. He had to admit that where there were people, there would be wealth. Since Winthrop started tourism, most of the businesses in this commercial street were restaurants and shops opened by the townspeople. Jiang Hai wasn't interested in these things, but since more than a month ago, there had been more and more visitors. Some big brands had also become interested in Winthrop. For example, Jiang Hai's big stores had been rented out. One of them was rented to Apple, because Jiang Hai thought that the American version of Apple would cause a sensation among the tourists in Huaxia. After all, it was twice as cheap as the Chinese version. But the problem was, even if it was twice as cheap, they could only make calls in China and couldn't go online. It was useless, after all, this wasn't the era of universal Wi-Fi. The 4G network in China was the fastest in the world, except for South Korea. It was much faster than the United States. And the traffic fee wasn't very high, so there was no way to connect to the 4G network in China, so it was destined to be meaningless. It was like spending money to buy an iPad, and it wasn't that big. After all, buying an iPad in China only cost 3,000 to 4,000 RMB, so it wasn't suitable. But Apple phones weren't sold a lot here. But computers and iPads were selling well. In the United States, Apple computers weren't considered high-end computers, and it was the same in China. Most of the market here was occupied by HP and Dell, but Apple computers were selling at a much higher rate in China. Seeing that Apple was making a lot of profits here, this month, another electronics giant in the United States also looked for Moses Adams and rented another shop from Jiang Hai. It was Jiang Hai's shop, Google. As soon as he came here, Jiang Hai was attracted by the poster painted on it. Smart glasses? It looks very high-end. Looking at the poster displayed in front of him, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then said with some interest. He glanced inside the shop and found that many Huaxia tourists and Americans were having fun inside. The smart glasses were really just a pair of glasses, but something was added on the side of the glasses. Smart glasses were almost similar to a mobile phone except for making calls, taking photos, recording videos, and so on. But the price was much more expensive than a mobile phone. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice also looked over. If you want to know more, go in and take a look. Looking at the shop that was not closed yet, Bernice couldn't help but smile and say, then she pulled Jiang Hai into the shop. As soon as they walked into the shop, there was already a shop assistant who greeted them. There was no melodramatic plot of looking down on people here. These specially recruited shop assistants were still very enthusiastic. Sir, miss, how can I help you? Seeing the two walk in, the shop assistant smiled and said to Jiang Hai and Bernice. His attitude was quite good. I want to see your smart glasses here. Hearing the shop assistant's words, Jiang Hai said directly. Okay, this way please. After leading Jiang Hai to the smart glasses and motioned for Jiang Hai to put on the glasses, the shop assistant began to explain. It was similar to what Jiang Hai thought. It was almost like a mobile phone peripheral, nothing more. The whole glasses were made of titanium alloy and looked very cool. The best part of this kind of glasses was that it could be equipped with lenses. When driving, this thing could be used as sunglasses and as a driving recorder. Also, it could be used to make calls, check WeChat, surf the internet, watch movies, and read novels directly. It was indeed very convenient. However, there was still the problem. After reaching Huaxia, all the latter functions disappeared. After all, it was connected to the United States. It also used Google's search engine, not Huaxia's Baidu. However, Jiang Hai was mainly in the United States now, so he was still quite interested in this thing. After hearing the shop assistant's introduction, Jiang Hai also took a look. He was not short of money now, so he could just buy whatever he was interested in. He looked at the price. The price of the Google third generation was $1,100, and the second generation was $1,150. If he wanted to pair it with the titanium alloy frame, he would need to add another $100. Jiang Hai did not care about this. He was very rich. The third generation was lighter than the second generation and had better heat dissipation. However, it was not as sturdy as the second generation. Jiang Hai still bought the third generation, a silver one. Then, it came with a transparent lens inside and a set of dark blue reflective lenses on the outside. The lenses could be removed and replaced at any time. It cost Jiang Hai $1,250 in total. It was not expensive and was within Jiang Hai's acceptable range. Since Jiang Hai had bought it, he had to ask Bernice, Daliana, and Marian at home. When they saw Jiang Hai's toy, they were also very interested. Daliana and Marian each asked for one, and Jiang Hai bought it for them. One was pink, and the other was orange, and they both had lenses. Xiaoya and Bernice were also very interested, but they did not ask Jiang Hai to buy it. Although Jiang Hai did not care about the $2,500, Bernice still paid for it herself. There were 5 glasses in total. After paying, it would take a few days for them to pick it up. Although the glasses were in stock, the lenses needed to be replaced. This time, Jiang Hai had one more toy. After buying new things, Jiang Hai and Bernice wandered around the place. After all, it was already late. After 9:30, the shops closed their stalls one after another. Only some places like bars were still open, but Jiang Hai and Bernice couldn't go to those places to play. They probably thought that they wouldn't be able to see much of it anymore. That was why Bernice asked Jiang Hai to go back with her. After returning to the manor, Jiang Hai parked the car downstairs. He and Bernice walked into the manor one after another. The two did not speak until they went upstairs. "Well, thank you so much for going to the movies with me and shopping with me today." When they were about to part on the second floor, Bernice hesitated and said to Jiang Hai in front of her. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also smiled. "You don't have to thank me. Besides, I'm going to the movies. Didn't I also buy things when I went shopping?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai waved his hand and said to her with a smile. Jiang Hai did not care about these things. "Then, let's go to sleep." Bernice glanced at the time. It was already 10:00 in the evening. She did not know what she was thinking now. After glancing at Jiang Hai, she turned and ran back to her room. As for Jiang Hai, he looked at her back and couldn't help but smile. This girl is really interesting. When Jiang Hai walked into the room, there was already a person lying on his bed. Sometimes, things that were destined to happen would not be easily changed. Chapter 554. Boss, are these the new glasses you bought? Watching Jiang Hai take out a pile of boxes from Google's store, Burke Dollar, who was sitting in the driver's seat, couldn't help but ask him with a smile. "Yeah." Wearing his new glasses proudly, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. "Boss, try this first. If it's good, I'll buy one for Penelope." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Burke Dollar also said with a smile. Jiang Hai also saw a trace of fatherly love in his eyes. Since Burke Dollar earned more and more money, of course, he mainly earned Jiang Hai's money. Jiang Hai couldn't be too stingy with the money he earned. Otherwise, he would be disloyal, so he paid the same salary. But the bonus was frighteningly high. Burke Dollar's current annual income was definitely higher than that of an ordinary doctor. Because of the money, the relationship between him and his daughter was much better than before. Now, when he mentioned the girl, there was no longer a deep hatred on his face. Instead, there was a hint of a smile. Jiang Hai was also very happy about Burke Dollar's change. Although he felt that Penelope might have some power, it was someone else's business. Jiang Hai really couldn't say anything. And most importantly, it seemed to be very popular in the United States. Okay. After answering Burke Dollar casually, Jiang Hai put the things on the seat and fastened his seatbelt. Seeing that Jiang Hai was ready, Burke Dollar stepped on the gas and drove to their destination. Counting the time, he and Bernice had been shopping together for 4 days. Every night during these 4 days, Bernice would pester Jiang Hai to go out and play. Of course, they couldn't always go to the movies and go shopping, such things could only be done once. On the second day, she said she wanted to learn how to ride a horse, so she learned from Jiang Hai for half a day. On the third day, she said she wanted to go to the beach, so they went to the beach for a barbecue. On the fourth day, last night, she said she wanted to play chess. On the second day, Jiang Hai played a game of chess. But even so, Jiang Hai still did what he had to do. On the day of the movie, Sheila Rodney was waiting for him in his room. This girl's character was very free and easy. As mentioned before, after seeing Jiang Hai, she took the initiative. On the day they went to learn how to ride a horse, it was Ohilia Clive. On the day they went to the beach, it was Bridget Nelson. On the night of the chess game, it was Janice Joy. Aphrodite and the other 8 girls were all inexplicably with Jiang Hai, ahem. During these few days, Jiang Hai and the others didn't idle around. They went to the winery to see if there was anything they could help with. After a few days, there wasn't much to be done in the winery. Taking advantage of the cool autumn weather, Robbins Garcia went to find Jiang Hai and told him that it was time to buy some cows. So they set off early in the morning to buy some cows. But just then, Google called Jiang Hai to tell him that the glasses he ordered had arrived. Jiang Hai went to pick up the goods first. After picking up the goods, Jiang Hai and the others drove the two F-750s with the rear panel mounted. They left the town and headed towards the cattle market. In fact, when it came to raising and selling cattle, there was a so-called market all year round. But the real golden period for raising cattle was mainly divided into two parts, spring and autumn. When buying cattle in spring, there was no need to worry about the cost of forage, which meant that the cost of feed would be much cheaper. By autumn, the price of the cattle would have risen for half a year, and they would also be fatter. Cattle bought for $2,000 and sold for $4,000 in autumn could make a lot of money. If they were willing, they could raise the cattle for another winter and sell it in spring. This way, a cow could be worth $5,000. Some people said that they could continue to raise the cattle, but in fact, no one would do that. No one would raise a cow for 2 years before selling it, because don't forget that American beef was graded. Grade A was a cow that was 9 to 30 months old. 30 months wasn't 2.5 years. When buying a cow, it was basically a cow that had been raised for half a year. Who would you sell it to if you raised it for 2 years? Then it would be a grade B cow, and the price of a grade B cow would drop by 2/3. So basically, there were only two types of cattle raising. One was to sell the calves, raise the calves for half a year after the calves were born, and then sell them. The other was to sell the meat, just like Jiang Hai's first time selling cattle. He bought a calf in autumn, raised it for half a year, and sold it in April next year after paying the tax. That was the process of raising cattle. Every year in April and September, many small towns in the United States that focused on cattle raising would be filled with shouts. Those were the people who were buying and selling cattle. But Jiang Hai didn't have to worry about the sales of his beef, so he didn't participate in the sales in April. But now was the time to buy, and he wouldn't let it go. The closest place to sell cattle was near Winthrop and his manor. They went there last year to buy cattle, but to be honest, Robbins Garcia and the others didn't like this place. It was a small place. If Jiang Hai hadn't come too late last year, and all the big cattle fairs had already dispersed, they wouldn't have gone there to buy cattle. This year, Jiang Hai had plenty of time, so they had to go to a big place to buy cattle. According to the map of the United States, the biggest beef markets were mainly in Texas and Montana. The number of people who raised cattle in Boston was probably less than in Canada. The place Jiang Hai and the others were going to this time was a little far. They had to walk along the Alabama mountains for a 2-hour drive. The place they were going to was a small town under the jurisdiction of Manchester called Marion. It was also the biggest cattle market in the area. To be honest, Jiang Hai had been here for a year, but he hadn't really had a good time here. This time, he was going to Marion to enjoy the scenery near his home. When the two F-750s entered Ma-on town one after the other, the noises from outside and the stench of livestock entered Jiang Hai's nose. It took him a long time to get used to it. After parking the car, Jiang Hai and the others got out. This time, there were 4 people in total. In addition to Jiang Hai, Burke Dollar, Robbins Garcia, and Philemon Turner were all here. These 3 were the founding fathers of Jiang Hai's manor. They naturally wouldn't let go of something like buying cattle. After getting out of the car, the 4 of them gathered together and walked towards the square. As soon as they walked over, Jiang Hai found that it was indeed different from when he bought cattle last year. Now, the whole town was full of people and livestock. The sound of hawking could be heard everywhere. Jiang Hai looked around and found that the things sold here were much more than what he saw in the town last year. Cattle, sheep, horses, and all kinds of livestock could be found here. In addition, there were also many other things sold here, such as some animals, dogs, and cats. It could be said that this was a huge animal supermarket. As long as you wanted to buy a normal animal, you could find it here. However, although Jiang Hai was very curious about this place, he still wanted to solve the most important problem of cattle first before walking around. So the four of them walked straight to the cattle area. When they walked, Robbins Garcia deliberately asked Jiang Hai, "Jiang, are we mainly raising Angus cattle this year? This year, do you have any suggestions?" Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and asked him. "My suggestion is still to mainly raise Angus cattle. After all, this kind of cattle is very docile. There are more than 10,000 of them in the manor. We have a large number of them. It won't be good if they are mixed together. But I'm a little worried. After all, Angus cattle are small breeds of cattle. Although they produce a lot of meat, they are too light. If we raise Emmental cattle, we can earn at least 300 kilograms of beef." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia said helplessly. In fact, before last year, in his opinion, this was meaningless, because Emmental cattle are big, but they also eat a lot, and they are not so easy to manage. Although they can be used as beef cattle and dairy cows, he still felt that Angus cattle were better, because after conversion, an Angus cattle is more profitable than a Emmental cattle. But this year, he knew that he was wrong. When Jiang Hai's beef was slaughtered, he was stunned. An Angus cow weighing 750 kilograms can be slaughtered to 450 kilograms of beef. Nearly 100 kilograms of beef is superior A grade. According to this standard, a 1200 kilograms Emmental cow can be slaughtered to 60%, which means that it can be slaughtered to 720 kilograms of beef. Doesn't that mean that superior A grade beef can reach more than 150 kilograms? If that's the case, then wouldn't a cow be worth $200,000? Moreover, these cows were eating the grass in the pasture. There was no need to worry about the problem of feed at all. Jiang Hai even directly sold the grass, which put Robbins Garcia in a very passive position. Since he didn't want to help Jiang Hai get the most benefits, he had been deliberately avoiding this question recently. But now that Jiang Hai asked, he had no choice but to brace himself and tell Jiang Hai what he was thinking. Indeed, the two types of cattle were not easy to mix. If he wanted to exchange them for a large number of Emmental cattle, then the heifers and calves in the manor would have to be sold first. Then let's raise Angus cattle, don't feel burdened. Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai smiled and said to him. In fact, Jiang Hai also knew this in his heart. Indeed, it would be good if a cow can be sold for $200,000, but the problem is whether Emmental cattle can be slaughtered to produce marbled beef. This is the key. Chapter 555. Beef cattle were also very particular, and this was similar to race theory. Although it seemed that there was not much difference between a cow and a cow was a cow, in fact, cows were also divided into various grades and ranks. If you don't consider the fact that Jiang Hai has spiritual energy, the best breed of beef cattle in the world, although you don't want to admit it, is indeed the Japanese cattle, followed by the Angus cattle of the United States. 70% of the marbled beef in the world belonged to these two breeds. Although they were both cattle breeds, the difference was huge, especially in this modern technological society. Huaxia's cattle did not have any good breeds. Huaxia's best Lucy cattle was not even in the top 50 in the world. Although some Emmental cattle and Limousin cattle were imported, these imported cattle were not purebred cattle. Moreover, there was a limited number of them, and they were all bulls. In the case of crossbreeding, the calves born were indeed a lot worse. To put it bluntly, this was the superiority and inferiority of the species. Even though they were both felines, how could a tiger and a house cat be the same? Although Wagyu and Angus cattle were not tigers, they were at least lynxes in the beef cattle world. Huaxia's cattle were no different from domestic cats. Did Huaxia's cattle have no advantages? Of course not. Speaking of which, Huaxia's cattle had an obvious advantage over these high-quality cattle breeds. For example, the strength of Huaxia's bulls was not ordinary. They were also aggressive and had strong combat power. If this was a few hundred years ago, Huaxia's cattle would have a huge advantage in farming. But now, machines were used for farming, especially in America. So, it was useless for the cattle to be strong. The quality of the meat was the most important. This was also the reason why Huaxia had the second largest beef cattle in the world, second only to the US. But internationally, Huaxia's beef was not famous at all. The number of cattle sold in Japan was less than 1% of Huaxia's, but the money they earned was more than the total number of cattle sold in Huaxia. The grades of beef did not have much influence in China. In China, 70% of the beef sold was still based on the parts. China did not know about the grades of beef. If it was an ordinary American beef sold in China, they would be overjoyed at the price. But if Jianghai's beef was sold in China, they would cry. This was because the routes were different, and the impact was different. Simmental cattle were originally from Switzerland. If it was a purebred Simmental cattle, Jianghai might be able to produce a lot of high-quality beef. But these were crossbreeds. Haha. It was hard to say. At least, Jianghai did not have the intention to rear them. After confirming the breed of the cattle, everyone started to look for more. This time, Jianghai had already decided to buy a total of 15 million head of cattle. At present, there were still about 12,000 cows left in the manor, but 4,000 of them were calves. However, after raising them for half a year, it was almost time for them to be sold. That means in April next year, Jianghai will have 19,000 cows to sell. It was almost 20,000 cows. These cows had been ordered before they were sold. Zhang Dihai from Haishang Supermarket had ordered 5,000 cows. Haishang Supermarket had made a lot of profits from this year's beef. Now, they were selling a limited amount of beef. But when the beef was placed on the meat rack, it would be snatched up instantly. It was very popular, especially among the owners of high-end restaurants. So, they loved this meat. But it was a pity that there was not a lot of meat. Therefore, after killing 2,000 cows, he directly ordered 5,000 cows. As for Qi Li, she originally wanted to open a branch, but Jianghai did not agree. After all, the restaurants of the Qi group did not collect taxes now. If they blindly opened a branch, it would be easy to cause a backlash. The loss would outweigh the gain. So, it was better to just sell small ones. If the steps were too big, they really did not know how to continue. So, they still ordered 1,000 cows. This was 6,000 cows. The remaining 13,000 cows were reserved for Pra Walton. The Walton family's Walmart supermarkets were all over the world. And there were people everywhere who could afford this kind of beef. This time, they planned to open a branch in Huaxia. Of course, the main places to open a branch were Shanghai and Guangdong province. Originally, they did not open a branch in the capital, but because of Qi Li, they deliberately bypassed this place to give face to Jianghai. 19,000 cows were sold out before they could even raise them. They had to admit that Jianghai's beef was very popular. If a cow was sold for $140,000, Jianghai's beef business could make $66 billion next year. According to the joke, this was much faster than robbing. The four of them divided into two groups and began to buy the cows they wanted. There were all kinds of cows for sale here. There were small groups, single breeding cows, and large transactions. These were not accurate. Jianghai and the others only chose calves. They would choose the breeding cows individually. Don't forget that they came here in an F-750. This car was not just for show. They would choose dozens of good breeding cows. That was the purpose of these cars. Unfortunately, they did not choose too many good cows today. They only bought 5, and the rest were from the half-grown farms. When choosing cows, they had to choose ones with tight skin, clear eyes, and intact teeth. They did not need to pay too much attention to the patterns on their bodies. But other than that, there were also a lot of things to pay attention to. However, in the United States, cows were sold with computer numbers. As long as they checked, they could find out more or less about the cows. Of course, this was not absolutely correct. Except for Jiang Hai, the other three were all experienced cowboys. They could tell at a glance whether the cows had problems or not. Before they knew it, they had walked for more than 2 hours. Jiang Hai and the others had bought more than 4,000 bulls. After leaving the address, Jiang Hai waved his hand and directly paid the deposit. When these people sent the cows back to the manor, Jiang Hai could pay the money. In addition to the more than 4,000 bulls, Jiang Hai had to look for cattle brokers for the remaining 10,000 or so. After all, this was a big deal. However, Jiang Hai and the others didn't need to look for the cows themselves. This was because at this time, after they bought the cows had already taken the initiative to look for them. These people were very good at discerning prices. After Jiang Hai and the others followed these people to look at the cows they had brought, they finally decided to buy the remaining 11,000 cows from a man named George Woog. This man was very happy and repeatedly assured that there would be no problems with his cows. After all, with these 11,000 cows, if he earned $50 per cow, he would earn $550,000. The dentists who earned the most in the United States earned an average of only $150,000 a year. His offer of $500,000 instantly beat most of the other professions. It was impossible for him not to pay attention to this. After all, Robbins Garcia and the others were also famous cowboys in this area. If he lied to them, not only would this deal be ruined, his reputation might also be tarnished. After everything was finalized, Jiang Hai and the others went to a small law firm nearby. Well, in fact, this law firm was specifically made to prepare contracts for these people. What they earned was the money they earned from these contracts. After signing 3 contracts, Jiang Hai and the others' task of buying cows for today was considered to be over. After buying all the cows, before they knew it, it was already late. Jiang Hai and the others thought about it and decided to go back first. As for the breeding cows, they would come back tomorrow to take a look. Anyway, it was not too far away. After making the decision, Jiang Hai said that he would treat them to a meal here. After that, they would leave. There was a cattle market here, so naturally, there would be a lot of people eating here. Therefore, there were still a lot of restaurants here. However, Jiang Hai had already smelled the smell of cows for a day. He did not want to eat beef anymore. Therefore, after walking around, they decided to eat pizza. After arriving at the pizza restaurant, Jiang Hai ordered 3 12-inch pure meat pizzas. Then, he waited with Robbins Garcia and the others. While waiting, they saw a black man carrying a cage walk into the store. As soon as the man walked in, Jiang Hai's attention was attracted by the little guy in the cage. The little guy was snow-white, chubby, and had no hands or feet. It was like a stick lying on the ground. Its big black eyes were looking around, and it had a small mustache. Even Jiang Hai, who liked beasts, couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then he looked at the little guy with a serious face. At this time, the black man also noticed Jiang Hai's gaze after ordering the pizza. "Hey, yellow man, are you interested in this little guy?" Seeing Jiang Hai's interested gaze, the black man asked Jiang Hai loudly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai frowned slightly, but he still nodded. It can't be helped. Black people in the United States are like this. Most of them have not received any education, so they are straightforward and vulgar. Moreover, they often complain about other people's race. But in fact, black people are the most racially honest. Yellow man, there is definitely no problem with saying that, but why didn't he say, "Hey bro, hey buddy, hey friend"? Instead, he said, "Yellow man." This means that from the bottom of his heart, he does not have a good impression of yellow people. If you want it, $10,000, it is yours. Seeing Jiang Hai nodding, the black man did not hesitate and patted the cage directly. The little guy inside couldn't help but shrink his neck and look at the black man behind him in horror. Seeing the little guy's frightened look, Jiang Hai frowned. This guy is really annoying. Chapter 556. This is a Greenland seal. Boss, are you interested in this little guy? Although they were dissatisfied with the black man's words, he didn't say anything like monkey, so Robbins Garcia didn't say anything. Philemon also saw that Jiang Hai seemed to be interested in this little guy, so he whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. The Greenland seal, also known as the harp seal, is a seal that lives in the Arctic Circle. It can grow up to 1.7 meters long and 130 kilograms in weight. Its face is broad, and its eyes are close together. It's very big, whether it's a cub or an adult seal. It looks very good, and its main habitat is the ice belt area of Canada. Recently, this kind of seal was very popular because it looked very cute. Its pair of big eyes were blinking, making it very lovable. However, Canada has banned the hunting of this creature since 1987, so this creature is rare in the market. However, other than Canada, the capture of this creature was not prohibited in other countries. In 2008, in the IUCN Red List of Endangered Species, this creature is a non-dangerous species, so it doesn't need to be protected. Except for Canada, only huaxia is a second-level protected animal. Because in China, even a Massachusetts crocodile was a protected animal. There were too few wild animals in China. If this is a small pet, then it's not bad. Hearing what Philemon Turner said, Jiang Hai also whispered. To be honest, he doesn't know what's going on recently, but he seems to have a little girl's heart. His resistance to such cute creatures is slowly declining. Now that he heard what Philemon said, he was really interested. But $10,000 is too expensive, I'll talk to him. Philemon is also a black man. It's always easier for black people to communicate with each other, so when he heard that Jiang Hai wanted to buy, Philemon also said with a smile. Then he went straight to the black man. Seeing Philemon coming over, the black man showed a smile. Hey, brother, you want to buy this seal? Seeing Philemon walking towards him, the man stretched out his hand. After a series of dazzling bumps with Philemon, he said slowly. American blacks like to make a fuss about greetings. It was said that this was a secret signal during the black slave era. As for whether it was true or not, it was not clear. But at least this was a hip-hop culture's gesture. Although Philemon had never dabbled in hip-hop before, he was very familiar with the black man's greeting gestures. He knew what kind of gesture it was as soon as he saw it. He went up and clapped his hands. Anyway, he was very familiar with the black man's greeting. This made the black man feel closer to him. Yes, I quite like this little guy, but $10,000 is too expensive. Hearing his words, Philemon shrugged and said with a serious face. Hearing Philemon's words, the black man couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai behind him. Because he just saw that Philemon was sitting with Jiang Hai. When he came over, he also talked to Jiang Hai, so he knew that it wasn't Philemon who wanted this seal, but Jiang Hai. Looking at Jiang Hai and Philemon, he couldn't help but laugh. Hey, brother, don't scare me. The one who wants this little guy should be the yellow man behind you. You know, yellow people are very rich, $10,000 isn't very expensive. Looking at Philemon, the black man said with a smile. That's my boss. That's right, he wants it too. But $10,000 is impossible. My boss has been in the United States for a while. He's not the fat sheep you think he is. Since we can't reach an agreement, then forget it. Philemon shrugged, he didn't come here to pick a fight, so he directly said to the black man, then turned around and was about to leave. Wait a minute, since you're also black, I'll give you a discount of $2,000. $8,000, if you want it, you can take it. Hearing Philemon's words, the black man couldn't help but hesitate for a moment, then he stopped him. In the United States, there were very few places to bargain, and Americans were originally willing to bargain. Therefore, except for some old urban areas or areas planned by the government, there were supermarkets everywhere in the United States, and there were no food markets. The reason why the black man was willing to reduce the price was mainly because the price he asked was too expensive. Although the Greenland seal was cute, it was just cute. Its main economic value was its fur and seal oil, but seal skin was no longer worn by people. Because of the existence of mink fur, most of the fur had been completely replaced, and only some of these fur could be sold at a high price. And seal oil wasn't in the Middle Ages, who still used this kind of oil? Except for the Eskimos. Therefore, this kind of seal could be found all over the world. There were nearly 10 million of them, and they were the most diverse species of finned animals in the Northern Hemisphere. There were more than 1.2 million newborn seals every year, so there was no need to worry about the number of these little guys. It was really too much to sell such a little guy for $10,000 here. Then the black man reduced the price to $8,000. $6,000, if it's okay, we'll take it. Hearing this person's words, Philemon also gave Jiang Hai a meaningful glance. After seeing Jiang Hai hesitating for a moment, Philemon turned his head and continued to speak. Translator, WQL editor, Alim, hey, buddy, it's not easy for us to catch this little guy. We're going to catch this little guy in Canada. You know how difficult it is to deal with those boorish guys in Canada. Some of us were even injured in order to catch this little guy. The black man said helplessly when he heard Philemon slashing another 2,000 yuan. Stop, just tell me if 6,000 is okay or not, Philemon said seriously. 6,000. 6,000 is not okay, you can add a little more, $6,500. If it's okay, we'll take it. If not, you can go back and eat your pizza. Hearing what Philemon said, the man hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said. After hearing the price of $6,500, Jiang Hai was quite satisfied. After all, he got $3,500. Philemon also knew that he couldn't cut it down, so after seeing Jiang Hai agree, he also chose to make the deal. After taking the $6,500 from Jiang Hai, he handed it to the black man, then brought the little guy to Jiang Hai's side. Jiang Hai took the little guy in the cage, and the two pairs of eyes scanned each other. Little guy, you are mine from now on. Reaching into the cage and touching the little guy, Jiang Hai whispered. And the little guy, who was afraid of humans just now, may have felt Jiang Hai's aura, so he was very friendly to Jiang Hai. He squinted his eyes and accepted Jiang Hai's touch. Looking at the little guy, Jiang Hai was already thinking of a name for this little guy. Gidge. He's not Tartar, Gidge my ass. Then what should he call him? Ling Ling? Lon Lon? Well, I still don't know whether this little guy is male or female. I'll go back and discuss it with Daliana and the others. After touching the chubby little guy, Jiang Hai's pizza was also served. After Jiang Hai and the others quickly finished the 2 pizzas, they were ready to leave with the cage. But just as Jiang Hai and the others left the store, the black man followed them out. Hey, the people in front, wait a minute. Hearing the black man's words, Jiang Hai, Robbins Garcia, Philemon Turner, and Burke Dollar, who were walking, were all stunned. Why is this guy chasing us at this time? Is he regretting it? Of course, if he thinks they are easy to bully, then they will let him know what regret is. Hey, you guys are walking really fast. Seeing Jiang Hai and the others stop, the black man also sped up a few steps and ran over. What's the matter, man, is there anything else? Hearing his words, Philemon stepped forward and negotiated with him. It's nothing serious, it's just that your boss seems to be very interested in these little guys. We have a lot of good stuff there. Are you interested in taking a look? Jumping over Philemon, the black man looked directly at Jiang Hai and said to him. Good stuff? What good stuff? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. What does this guy mean? As long as you can think of it, we have it there. How about it? I know you rich people like to play with these things. Are you interested in going with me? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was indeed a little tempted. But just as he was about to say something, he was pulled by Robbins Garcia, which made him choose to shut his mouth for the time being. Sorry, it's a little late today. We have to pull the cows back to the manor, but we will come again tomorrow. If our boss is really interested in your things, then wait until tomorrow. Looking at the black man, Robbins Garcia said slowly. After speaking, the black man curled his lips helplessly and then gave up his seat. After he stepped aside, Jiang Hai and the others also got into the car in the distance, started the engine, and quickly left. Why wait until tomorrow to see it? Are you afraid that they will harm me? After sitting in the car, Jiang Hai held the Greenland seal pup and asked Robbins Garcia with a curious look. He originally wanted to go and take a look, but he was stopped by Robbins Garcia. Now that he thought about it, Robbins Garcia must have his own reasons. Robbins Garcia looked at Jiang Hai and asked curiously. There is a fear in this regard. He just said that this baby seal was caught by them together, which means that they are a poaching gang. Although these people are not professional killers or thugs, they are also ruthless people. According to your Hua Xia, you have to be vigilant. If they harm you, just me, Philemon, and Burke may not be their opponents. If you want to buy it tomorrow, we will call those guys over. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia smiled and said to him. The United States is not as peaceful as it seems. Chapter 557. Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai nodded in agreement. Indeed, it was important to be wary of people. You could not expect everyone in the world to be good people. On the surface, Jiang Hai's equipment was very ordinary, and he did not look like a particularly rich person. A family fortune of $1 million or so should not be enough to make people think of kidnapping him. However, it was better to be safe than sorry. What if someone wanted to take the risk? What if someone found out that he was not taking advantage of $1 million, but billions of dollars? Money moved people's hearts, and some things had to be guarded against. These people were poachers, which meant that they were ruthless, had weapons in their hands, and had the intention to go into exile. Robbins Garcia, Burke Dollar, and Philemon Turner were indeed very loyal to Jiang Hai, but no matter how strong they were just ordinary cowboys. There was still a big gap in terms of combat power compared to these people who licked blood on the tip of their blades. Professional things should be left to the professionals. It's not like Jiang Hai didn't have bodyguards. Whether it was Azalina, Knerson Peters, or Belle Lester, they were all much stronger than these three. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy could you win 100 battles. The biggest advantage of Robbins Garcia and the others was that they knew their position. The two F-750s sped along the National Highway of the United States. It took them nearly 2.5 hours to get there. However, it took them nearly 3.5 hours to get back, because there were still cows in the car. Cows were different from people. They needed to adapt. These cows were all breeding cattle, and they needed to be taken care of carefully. After the cows were sent back to the manor, Belle Lester and Harriman Fells had already set up the cowshed and the pasture. They unloaded the cows and put them on the pasture to eat some grass. When they had adapted and quieted down, they would put them in cages. The next thing to do was to wait for the cows that had been ordered to be delivered. They still had to go out tomorrow to buy some breeding cattle. Jiang Hai didn't buy any breeding cattle last year. All the breeding cattle were selected from the cattle he bought. Just like what Robbins Garcia had said, there were specializations in the industry. A normal beef cow was a beef cow, and a breeding cow was a breeding cow. Most of the bulls were infuriated. Otherwise, how could they have the leisure to eat grass to increase their meat? Only a small portion of the young bulls were left behind. However, with such a high selection rate, the breeding cattle success rate was really too low. This was because there were 8,000 cows here. Last year, 120 bulls were selected, but after a year, they were all useless. Therefore, Jiang Hai and the others directly killed and ate the meat. This year, Jiang Hai and the others prepared to buy some professional bowls. This was just like the difference between an ordinary player and a Japanese gamer, or an ordinary man and the male lead of a Japanese romantic drama. It was indeed a huge gap. Although I didn't want to admit it, it was true that there was a specialist in every field. After settling the bowls, Jiang Hai and the others went to pack up and sleep. But before he left, he told Bale that Burke Dahlia would stay in the manor to receive the cattle tomorrow, and that Bale would go with him. As for Azalina and Connor's son, they had nothing to do usually, so they would naturally accompany him. With the escort of these 3 people, Jiang Hai's safety shouldn't be a problem according to his estimation. As for the Greenland seal that had just been brought back, Delina and Marion were obviously more interested in it. They already had a pair of capybaras, so they didn't mind raising a baby seal. They immediately carried it into their room and let it stay in a bathtub of cold water. Of course, the seal couldn't be kept in a bathtub. However, Jiang Hai wasn't very worried, because it wasn't like he didn't have a swimming pool. The last time he used this swimming pool was when Feng Yunshin and Ai Xiaoxi came over to take photos. Usually, if Jiang Hai and the others wanted to play in the water, they would go to the beach instead of the swimming pool. And if this seal grew up, it would be enough for it to swim in the swimming pool. However, for the naming rights of this little guy, Jiang Hai, Delina, Marion, Bernice, and Lilia thought for a long time. According to Jiang Hai's previous naming routine, this little guy was so white, so it should be called Little Black, or named according to its cries. It should be called Ao Ao, or according to its original name, Ling Ling, Lon Lon, Hai Hai, Leopard. However, Leopard was a bit dirty. Hai Hai had the same name as himself. Lon Lon and Ling Ling were a bit too feminine, and this little guy seemed to be a male seal, so Jiang Hai was a little conflicted, and Delina and the others didn't have any good names to give it. Otherwise, let's call it White Hair. Jiang Hai thought for a while and said as he rubbed the little guy's soft skin. Sure enough, as soon as Jiang Hai's voice fell, Bernice and the others collectively opposed it. White Hair doesn't sound good, just give it a name. Hearing their collective opposition, Jiang Hai was helpless. Since they felt that White Hair didn't sound good, then let them name it themselves. In the end, the 4 women studied for a long time and decided to call this little guy Luck, which means lucky. However, Jiang Hai still felt that White Hair sounded better. So when the 4 women named this Xiao by Meatball, Jiang Hai had already pulled it over. After injecting spiritual qi, this little guy couldn't help but become a bit listless, which was a normal effect. With the upgrade of spiritual qi, it was no longer the same as before. Don't forget, when Jiang Hai upgraded Little Yellow and Little Black, they were still unconscious. These 2 fellows were still unconscious. Now that the spirit blood had turned into spirit qi, it was like local anesthesia and general anesthesia. He could now keep these little guys in a conscious state while upgrading, which was a good thing. After the spiritual qi entered the little guy's body, it began to take effect. The spiritual qi continued to wash away the hidden injuries in the little guy's body, or the original physical fitness. The changes that spiritual qi had on creatures were quite big. For example, the mountain lion that day was obviously much bigger than an ordinary mountain lion. Big Fool was now almost as big as a great white shark, and it was the biggest great white shark. After that day, Jiang Hai also came back to measure Little Yellow, Xiao Bai, Dai, and Chirp. Chirp could now fly, and its size was no smaller than an ordinary bald eagle. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to fly so easily. Ever since Chirps learned how to fly, it rarely ran on the ground. Instead, it spent most of its time flying in the sky. Jiang Hai also specially built a platform for it on the roof. Usually, it could land there. Of course, if it was raining, it could enter the house at any time. It wasn't like it couldn't open the door. As for Dai, he was more than 1 size bigger than an ordinary rat. Xiao Bai and Little Yellow were also about a third bigger than when they first arrived. Because these little guys were by his side every day, Jiang Hai didn't notice their changes, but they were constantly changing. While the little fellow was half asleep, he inputted the word white hair into its consciousness. Well, such a cute little guy would be called white hair in the future. How ironic. When the four girls thought of white hair, they didn't know if it would still recognize the name Luck. After solving the problem of Xiao Bai's fur, Jiang Hai, Robbins Garcia, and the others discussed the matter of buying cattle tomorrow and receiving beef cattle in the manor. Although these things had been done once last year, Jiang Hai still felt a little flustered. However, with Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar here, Jiang Hai didn't need to worry about these things. Speaking of which, after Jiang Hai came here, the two most useful talents he found were Robbins Garcia and Edouard Anderson. He had to admit that Jiang Hai's luck was very good. These two old men were loyal and honest. Most importantly, they were very capable and charismatic. Their personalities made it impossible for them to betray Jiang Hai. They were the strongest rope on Jiang Hai's battleship. Unless the boat capsized, they couldn't leave Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai was sailing the boat well now. Why would he let his boat capsize just like that? He was prepared to ride the wind and sail far away. Everything in the manor was arranged well by these two people. Jiang Hai didn't need to worry about these things at all. After arranging everything for tomorrow, Jiang Hai went back to sleep. It has been a while since he went to the hot spring. This was because as long as he went there, Bernice would look for him. Tonight, Bernice's attention was mainly focused on the white-haired man. After arranging his work, Jiang Hai finally went to the hot spring to take a bath. Naturally, the surprise would come slowly while he was taking a bath. When he heard the sound of footsteps. When he looked back, he found that Aphrodite and Dana had appeared behind him. When they saw Jiang Hai looking over, the two smiled and took off the bath towels wrapped around their bodies. Then, they walked to Jiang Hai's side. "Master, it's the two of us who will accompany you tonight. Do you have any other plans?" Aphrodite and Dana looked at Jiang Hai as they leaned into Jiang Hai's arms. Aphrodite even leaned close to Jiang Hai's ear and whispered to Jiang Hai. "No." Jiang Hai stretched his neck. This breath of air gave him goosebumps, but he didn't have any intention of refusing. When they heard Jiang Hai's words, Aphrodite and Dana looked at each other. Dana smiled and dived into the water. Chapter 558. "Hey, brother, you're finally here again. You know, I've been waiting for you all morning. What's wrong? Are you interested in what I'm talking about?" The next day, when Jiang Hai's two F-750s drove back into the town and parked in the parking lot, a black man walked over from afar and said with a smile on his face. This black man is none other than the guy who sold the white hair to Jiang Hai yesterday. It seems that he is very interested in this business. Jiang Hai and the others also got out of the car under his gaze. Today, Jiang Hai and the others came with a total of 6 people. In addition to Robbins Garcia and Philemon Turner who came here yesterday, Jiang Hai also brought Azalina Vicabrio, Belle Lester, and Knerson Peters. With these 3 people protecting him, unless the U.S. military wants to deal with him, Jiang Hai is still confident that he can escape. "Hey, Barton, now is the time for livestock trading, don't make trouble for me." Seeing Jiang Hai and the others coming down, the black man greeted them. At this time, the old man who has been in charge of the parking lot came over and said to the black man. It seems that this black man is quite famous here, but this reputation is definitely not a good one, otherwise, he wouldn't be warned. Hearing the old man's words, the black man named Barton couldn't help but be a little impatient. "Hey, old man, if I were you, I would take advantage of the fact that your Uncle Barton hasn't gotten angry yet and shove your head into your ass, then immediately clamp your ugly, old, and wrinkled face and roll to the corner over there." Listening to the old man's words, this black man named Barton is not so kind. Instead, his attitude is like when he provoked Jiang Hai last night. After all, for him, Jiang Hai is the god of wealth, so it is necessary to curry favor with them, but this old man is not, so it is strange that he has a good attitude towards him. "You. Hearing this Barton scolding him, the old man's face was very ugly, but he didn't dare to say anything. Because he also knows what kind of person this Barton is. If he goes against him, he won't have a good ending. Uncle, thank you for your reminder. This is our parking fee. I'm really interested in what he said. But at this moment, Jiang Hai walked out and gave the old man a franklin. This is their parking fee for the day, then he said to the old man. Hearing that Jiang Hai doesn't care about this Barton, what can the old man say? Shrugging his shoulders, the old man also turned around and left, and Barton came over again with a smile. I know, you are a kind yellow man. Let's go, I'll show you. After saying that, he was about to leave with Jiang Hai, but Conrad, who was behind Jiang Hai, suddenly took a step forward. His height of more than 2 meters completely covered Barton's face. His brain is not very good, but he knows that Jiang Hai can't be easily touched by strangers. Don't mind, this is my friend, I think you shouldn't mind, let's have a few more people. Looking at Barton's somewhat changed face, Jiang Hai walked forward with a smile and said to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Barton also laughed dryly. Boss, I'm going to pick a breeding cow first, we'll meet here at 11:30. Compared to Jiang Hai, the main purpose of coming here was to look at the goods, but for Robbins Garcia, the real purpose of coming here was to pick a breeding cow, so he was not going to go with Jiang Hai, but was going to pick a breeding cow alone. With Philemon Turner, the local tyrant, and the protection of Azalina, Conrad, and Belle, Jiang Hai should not have any problems, unless these guys don't want to stay in the United States anymore. Okay, you should also be careful. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also gave him a checkbook. This stack of checkbooks was signed by Jiang Hai, which meant that as long as Robbins Garcia filled in the numbers, he could go directly to the bank to exchange money. This was also Jiang Hai's trust in him. Of course, when he went to the bank to exchange money, the bank would call Jiang Hai to confirm. Although Jiang Hai trusted Robbins Garcia, he was not so generous that his money was Robbins Garcia's money. He was not a saint, his money would always be his money, no one could take money out of his pocket. Okay, I got it. After taking the checkbook, Robbins Garcia nodded and said, then walked to the cattle market in the distance. After he left, Barton also led Jiang Hai's group of 5 to the other side of the town. Soon, they walked out of the town and walked to the edge of the town. After arriving here, whether it was Belle or Azalina, both of their expressions changed. This was because this place really wasn't a good place. At this time, Jiang Hai and the others were in the middle of the town and the Alabama mountains. Near here was a grassland, and their goal was to deal with several large warehouses in front of the Alabama mountains. Behind the warehouses was the Alabama mountains, and there were grasslands on both sides. Not far ahead was a road. It could be said that this was a good place for criminals to hide and escape. According to the poachers, the animals that they stole were not protected by the U.S. government. In other words, the animals that they caught were not protected by the U.S. government. Naturally, they were protected locally. For example, the Greenland seal. Catching this thing in Canada would naturally be caught by the Canadian police. However, when they crossed the border and arrived in the United States, the Constitution of the United States did not protect the Greenland seal. This was because, except for Alaska, there was no such creature in the United States. Without such creatures, there was no point in protecting them. At the same time, because they were not endangered species, they were not protected internationally, not even in the Washington Convention. So, as long as they arrived in the United States, they would not break the law. However, nothing was certain. The politics between the two countries were very dirty. It was possible that these people would capture him for some purpose. So, it was not wrong to be careful. Of course, they were not the only animals allowed by the American government. Looking at the situation in front of them, Azalina and Bale couldn't help but become more cautious. Jiang Hai also slowed down a little when he saw them. Beside him, Conrad and Philip also slowed down their pace. We're almost there. Seeing Jiang Hai and the others slowing down, Barton thought that they were tired. He turned his head and said with a smile on his face. Then he also slowed down his pace and followed them. Although they walked very slowly, the road was not very far, so they slowly arrived in front of the warehouse. Looking at the closed big iron door of the warehouse in front of them, Jiang Hai and the others looked at each other. These guys really hid well. At this time, Barton also walked to the side of the door and knocked on it rhythmically. Then, a small window was pulled open on the door. A white man's face appeared in front of the small window. After glancing at Barton, he still looked at Jiang Hai and the others behind. "I brought the buyer here. Don't worry, it's fine. That person is the owner of the manor." Seeing the man's scrutinizing eyes, Barton smiled and introduced Jiang Hai behind him. Then, the man closed the small window again and opened the door. Barton directly walked in. When Jiang Hai wanted to follow, he was pulled back by Belle. "Close your eyes first before going in." Hearing Belle's words, although Jiang Hai was a little curious, he still closed his eyes and walked into the warehouse. After walking into the warehouse, he opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, he understood why Belle asked him to do this. After all, there was a difference in lighting between the inside and outside of the warehouse. It was as if you were used to staying outside in the sunlight. Once you entered a room, you would feel that your vision would turn dark and you would only be able to recover after a while. On the contrary, if you stayed in a dark place for a long time, you would also see a pale white light when you suddenly went into the sun. This was the visual stagnation. People's eyes needed some time to adapt to the light. Belle asked Jiang Hai to close his eyes before going in to let his eyes adapt. Sure enough, after walking in, although it was a little dark, he could still see the situation inside very clearly. At this time, there were a total of more than a dozen people at the door of the warehouse. These people were basically gloomy and cold. They sat in various corners. Although they looked like they were just sitting there casually, if there was a firefight, these people would be able to cover the entire area with the greatest firepower in an instant. It seemed that these people were not the kind of people that Jiang Hai had imagined would go poaching just because they were hot-blooded. On the contrary, they had some manners, but unfortunately, these manners weren't enough for Jiang Hai's group. "Let's go this way." While these people were looking at Jiang Hai's group was also looking at them. However, Barton didn't care about the atmosphere on both sides. After all, in his line of work, it was impossible to treat everyone as a friend. However, it seems like he really didn't intend to deal with Jiang Hai's group. He directly smiled at Jiang Hai and said. Jiang Hai saw his smile and nodded slightly. Then he walked into the room with vigilance. After walking for a few minutes, they arrived at the end of the warehouse. Barton opened another door here. Behind this door was another warehouse. And the good stuff he was talking about was inside this warehouse. Compared to the first warehouse, the second warehouse was much brighter. After all, they were here to do business, and if someone wanted to buy these goods, they would naturally come and look at them carefully. If the lights were as dark as the outside, it would be a bluff. Therefore, the light in the warehouse was very good. When Jiang Hai was the first to walk in, his mouth unconsciously opened wide. Chapter 559. When Jiang Hai walked into the warehouse, he couldn't help but open his mouth wide. Because in his line of sight, the warehouse was filled with cages, water troughs, and other things. Several headlights were hung high above the ceiling, illuminating the entire room. In front of Jiang Hai's eyes, there were many huge cages. Naturally, there were all kinds of animals in these cages. There were also many cages hanging above these cages, which contained all kinds of birds. In the water troughs in the distance, there were a lot of amphibians and precious fish. It can be said that this place is a small museum. When Jiang Hai and the others came in, the animals had some reactions. Some of the animals were lying on the ground, ready to attack. Some of the animals continued to lie there, showing that they have nothing to live for. Some of the animals screamed in horror. "Shut up, all of you." Hearing the cries of these animals, Barton, who walked in first, couldn't help but yell. He directly picked up the pistol on his back and fired a shot at the ceiling. Sure enough, after the gunshot, these birds and animals stopped screaming. It seems that in their memory, this thing is indeed very lethal. Seeing Barton firing a shot, Azalina and Belle looked at each other and quietly turned off the safety of their guns. Their eyes also swept around unconsciously. Philip was also a little vigilant, but although he was an ordinary person, he wasn't afraid. After all, he walked through a rain of bullets. How could he be afraid so easily? However, vigilance was indispensable. "Come, this way please, I'll introduce you to some of the more popular animals here." However, it seems that Barton didn't have the intention to eat Jiang Hai. After firing the shot, he casually put the gun back on his waist, then smiled at Jiang Hai and said. Jiang Hai also walked forward with him, his eyes also scanning the animals around him. The United States, although it's not the most liberal country in the world when it comes to raising pets, it's actually not too far behind. As long as you have the money, you can get the local protection agency to raise anything you want except gray wolves and bison. Barton said to Jiang Hai with a smile, probably afraid that Jiang Hai wouldn't buy anything. What he said was true. The United States is very liberal when it comes to raising pets. Brown bears, tigers, lions, golden eagles, and even the symbol of the United States, bald eagles, and other beasts and birds of prey are not prohibited. The most famous Tyson and O'Neill both raised tigers. Although they weren't big, they were still tigers. The police in the United States are more lenient than the police in Huaxia. You are free to raise whatever you want. Of course, the most important thing was that your neighbor wouldn't sue you. If someone reported you, and your pet had a record of injuring people, then even if you had a large dog, you would still be taken away. The law enforcement here was much stronger than the law enforcement in China. However, Jiang Hai doesn't need to care about this because his manor is big enough and he doesn't have any neighbors. There are no other manors or other people's territories near his manor. He is a person without neighbors. So he can raise whatever he wants. With his status in Winthrop, it will be very easy for him to raise anything he wants. However, there are also animals that can't be raised in the United States. Americans pay great attention to local ecological and environmental protection. Therefore, there are some animals that are banned from being raised in the United States. For example, wolves. The North American gray wolf was originally the largest canine in the world, but it was almost extinct. In order to protect this animal, the United States is not allowed to capture or kill any wolf species. Therefore, wolves are not allowed to be raised, including gray wolves and even coyotes. All wolves are not allowed to be raised. There is also the North American bison. This animal is also extinct. Recently, it is said that there is a conservation group in Yellowstone National Park. It is also a protected species and is completely prohibited from being raised by humans. However, other than bison and wolves, there are many other animals here. Look at this. This is a black panther. I got it from Africa last month. I know you rich people like these guys. There are a total of 3 of these panthers, a mother and 2 cubs. The adult one is $150,000, and the juvenile one is $80,000. If you don't like black, there are leopards and cheetahs here, but they are much cheaper than this black panther. The adult leopard is only $80,000, the same price as the cubs. The cheetahs are only $60,000. Barton led Jiang Hai forward as he led him. The first thing he saw was a huge iron cage. Inside the iron cage, there were 3 creatures lying on the ground. The largest of them was an adult black panther. At this moment, it was sticking out its tongue and staring at Jiang Hai and the others outside the cage with its pale yellow eyes. Jiang Hai was very sure that if it wasn't for the cage, it would have already pounced on them. Compared to this panther, the 2 cubs were much more foolish. They were still looking at Jiang Hai and the others curiously. He had to admit that cats were indeed very cute when they were young. Their small, round heads were fluffy. Jiang Hai was a little tempted by the sight. Aside from the Black Panther, there were also cages for cheetahs and leopards. These two creatures were much more numerous than the Black Panther. When they saw Jiang Hai and the others walk over, they all had different expressions. This is also a cat. This is a leopard cat. It's been very popular recently, but they are much cheaper than real leopards. I'll charge you $8,000 for one leopard cat, and $15,000 for two. After passing through the leopard area, they saw a creature that was much smaller than a leopard, but looked almost the same as one. Barton introduced it. Next to the leopard cat is a lynx. Jaguars are not allowed to be kept in the United States, so we don't have any here. We also don't have any mountain lions, but we do have a lot of other things. This is a caracal, this is a golden cat, and this is an ocelot. These things are not easy to get. Of course, their prices are much lower than the big guys. Barton kept introducing Jiang Hai to the cats. Soon, they walked to the back of the cat exhibition area. There were a few cages where the biggest animals were kept. Jiang Hai saw what these animals were at a glance. They were tigers and lions. Basically, there were only two kinds of lions, the African lion and the Asian lion. The Asian lion was only found in India. In Africa, almost every country had their own lions, but in Jiang Hai's eyes, they were all the same. There were not as many different kinds of tigers, and the differences were quite big. Jiang Hai's hometown, Bingcheng, had the world's biggest tiger, the Amur tiger. It was probably the world's biggest cat. Of course, the mountain lion in Jiang Hai's manor was not counted. This is a Bengal tiger, it's cheaper, $100,000 for one. This is a Sumatra tiger, $120,000 for one. We don't have the ability to get the Amur tiger. This kind of tiger only lives in Huaxia and Soviet Russia. We don't dare to go there. The lions over there are $150,000 for a male lion, and $80,000 for a female lion. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to be interested in these big monsters, Barton also introduced them. To be honest, this price was nothing to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also liked to raise these animals. He liked these fierce animals, but it might be a little troublesome to raise them. After all, these animals were very fierce when they ate meat. Let's go this way, we still have a lot of things here. Seeing that Jiang Hai was hesitating, Barton didn't care. As long as Jiang Hai had the intention to buy, that was the most important thing. Then, he continued to lead Jiang Hai forward. After the cats, there were canines. Because there were no wolves, there weren't many canines here. The biggest one was the African hyena, but this guy was too ugly, and Jiang Hai didn't like it. Jiang Hai liked fierce animals. Jiang Hai couldn't stand the beauty and cries of these creatures. After the canines, there were pterodactyls, some suns, and baboons. Jiang Hai didn't see the orangutan that he wanted to see the most. Indeed, orangutans were very smart. Hunting orangutans wasn't allowed all over the world, and it was the same in the United States. This was because humans would always put their feelings on animals that were similar to them. Orangutans were the most similar to humans among the pterodactyls, so humans would always subconsciously protect them. Of course, poaching and other things would still happen. But there were no orangutans in this group, only various monkeys and baboons. After the pterodactyls, the mammals were more or less enough. What entered Jiang Hai's eyes were amphibians and cold-blooded animals. Compared to the various snakes and crocodiles in the zoo, there were also snakes and crocodiles here, but their numbers were much smaller. However, these animals could be sold. Jiang Hai walked over, and the first thing Jiang Hai saw was a 3-meter-long giant green snake. It was coiled there, and when it felt the movement of Jiang Hai and the others, the giant snake also raised its head. Its emotionless eyes scanned Jiang Hai and the others, and it kept flicking its tongue. This is the largest pterodactyl in South America, the water python, also known as the forest python. This one is already an adult, and it's 3.7 meters long. It's relatively small. If you're interested, you can take this snake for $10,000. Seeing Jiang Hai and the giant snake looking at each other, Barton smiled and said. For them, these snakes were actually very easy to catch. The place was also very close, in South America. Catching this snake was much easier than catching the Greenland seal, because in the chaotic South America, there were no police to catch them. Chapter 560. In addition to this green forest boa, they also have 3 green forest boas here, but none of them have reached adulthood, that is to say, their body length hasn't reached 3 meters. These small snakes can't be sold at a high price, but if you want to sell a beast, you have to get a big guy like this. When Jiang Hai heard that this big guy was only $10,000, he was stunned for a moment. It was really cheap. In the Amazon rainforest of South America, this kind of creature could be said to be at the top of the food chain. It was very powerful, and everything was its food, including crocodiles, wild boars, and piranhas. However, as an aside, anyone who has raised piranhas knows that piranhas are actually very weak. They are so timid that it makes one's hair stand on end. Not only were they unable to beat the average domesticated cichlids, such as maps and arhats, but they were also very cowardly. As long as people put their hands in the fish tank, they would run to the corner and gather together. They were not aggressive at all. In the southern United States, wild piranhas were similar to domesticated ones. People who fell into the river would be eaten. This had never happened at all. Even if it was a living creature, such as a sheep or a cow, if it crossed the river alive, the piranhas would basically not attack it because they were very afraid. But if the dead body or the animal was injured and had blood on it, the situation would be different. There was a very popular video on the internet. It said that a little girl used a piece of meat to catch a big bucket of piranhas. Although it was a little exaggerated, it was also true. The piranhas would attack crazily when they touched food. But this kind of fish was actually food for other animals in the Amazon. Crocodiles would eat them. The green forest boas would eat them. Some bigger fish would also eat them. For example, the giant bony-tongued fish raised in Jiang Hai's house before it mutated, and the gars, which were more like crocodiles than crocodiles, would all eat these guys. Therefore, piranhas were not a powerful species. The top of the food chain in South America was this kind of green sea boa. Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai made a mental note to buy it when he left. After walking past the cages of the lush forest boa, Jiang Hai lost interest in the snakes behind them. These people caught animals to sell, not to kill themselves. Therefore, there were no poisonous snakes here. There was only one type of real poisonous snake, the king cobra. Other than that, they were all pythons. However, Jiang Hai had already seen the lush forest boa, so he wasn't interested in these Burmese pythons and even the golden python. Soon, they walked past the area where the snakes were kept. Jiang Hai was also not interested in the frogs behind them. However, when they walked past the crocodiles, Jiang Hai's interest was aroused again. For this kind of monster that had existed since the age of dinosaurs, Jiang Hai was quite interested in crocodiles. And these people were indeed quite capable. They caught dozens of crocodiles, big and small. When they went to the zoo last time, the man had already introduced them to Jiang Hai. Crocodiles were divided into 2 types, the da and the crocodile. The da was basically smaller, and the crocodile was bigger. Now, there were basically all kinds of crocodiles caught here. However, the most famous da was the Yangtze crocodile in Huaxia. It was not available here. What a joke, this thing was already not available in China. It was really whimsical for the Americans to want to poach it in China. Jiang Hai was not very interested in the small crocodiles, but he was very interested in the biggest crocodile at the front. When he saw Jiang Hai's gaze, Barton, as the shopping guide, naturally played the role of introducing him. This is the Gulf crocodile, the biggest crocodile in the world. Of course, this one is definitely not the Gulf crocodile, but this guy is 4 meters long, so it's not small. We got it from Indonesia. In order to catch this guy, we spent a lot of effort. If you want, $40,000. After hearing what Jiang Hai said, Barton introduced the crocodile to him. In fact, this crocodile was indeed from Indonesia, but it was not worth $40,000 at all. Because this crocodile was farmed. Yes, the Gulf crocodile in the world was now classified as vulnerable, and the countries that had this kind of crocodile had listed it as a protected animal. But the countries in Southeast Asia were not so sure. The most important thing was that they could make money. For them, it was best if they could sell wild animals for money. But in recent years, as the number of wild animals in the wild decreased, they started to pay attention to farming. This was especially true for crocodiles. This kind of animal had a high economic value because crocodile skin was the best material for making leather goods, bags, and shoes. It was much better than cow skin. In recent years, eating crocodile meat had become popular in Southeast Asia and the Asian region, so crocodile meat was also sold. Many countries in Southeast Asia had a large number of crocodile farms. This big guy was actually taken from a farm. It was originally kept as a breeding crocodile. After all, it was not easy to grow so big. But this guy actually escaped. After it was caught, the people from this organization happened to come across it and bought it for $2,000. $1 was equivalent to more than 2,000 Indonesian rupees, and $1 was equivalent to more than 13,600 Indonesian rupees. For the people over there, $2,000 was a huge sum of money. So, they sold it without hesitation. Of course, it took a lot of effort for these people to transport this thing back. But if they really sold it for $40,000, it would be a huge profit. And Jiang Hai did not know the price of these things. Hearing Barton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ponder for a moment. Although he didn't know if he was being cheated or not, this amount of money was indeed a small amount for him. It was understandable for him to spend this money to buy some animals he liked. So now, he was calculating in his heart, what exactly was he going to buy? This was a problem. Seeing Jiang Hai deep in thought, Barton also knew that now was not the time to disturb Jiang Hai. He stood quietly on the side, waiting for Jiang Hai to make a decision. But at this time, the originally closed door was suddenly pushed open. Clang! The door heavily slammed against the wall on the other side of the warehouse. Then, a black man about 2 meters tall walked in with a bottle of wine in his hand. When he saw Jiang Hai's group, his eyebrows raised. But when he saw Azalina behind Jiang Hai, his eyebrows turned into a trace of lust, then he walked over. "Hey, big brother, you came back after drinking?" Seeing the burly man come in, Barton immediately greeted him with an obsequious smile. However, the burly man didn't pay attention to him as he pushed him aside. Then the burly man walked towards Jiang Hai and took a deep breath. Then he smiled at Jiang Hai and said, "Brother Jiang Hai, I've been waiting for you." "Boy, what are you doing here?" Hearing the voice mixed with the smell of alcohol and bad breath, Jiang Hai frowned. "We are here to buy something, is there a problem?" Waving his hand, Jiang Hai didn't care if this guy understood what he meant, and directly said to him. After staying in the United States for a year, Jiang Hai was already very familiar with the tricks of these beauties. In front of them, when you should be tough, you should be tough. When you shouldn't be tough, you should also be tough. Otherwise, they will think that you are easy to bully. Besides, Jiang Hai also has the capital to be tough. Those billions of savings are not a joke. What's the problem? I'm telling you, the problem is big. I don't want to do business with you, get lost. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the drunkard here opened his mouth and said to Jiang Hai while breathing out the smell of alcohol. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's eyes flashed, but then he smiled. It's not a big deal if he doesn't want to do business with you. The things are yours, it's up to you whether you want to sell them or not, let's go. Since someone came to disturb the situation, Jiang Hai didn't have to buy these things. Since they are not going to make money, Jiang Hai didn't want to stay here any longer. He waved his hand and prepared to leave. Wait a minute, do you think you can come and go as you please? Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the drunkard suddenly said, then stopped in front of Jiang Hai with an evil smile and pointed at Jiang Hai arrogantly. What do you mean by this? Now Jiang Hai can tell that this guy is looking for trouble. If he just drank too much and didn't want to sell his things, then Jiang Hai won't bother with him, but if he's looking for trouble, then Jiang Hai will let him know what it means to be stubborn. What do you mean? You've been here for so long, don't you need to spend money? You have to spend money to go to the zoo, $100,000 per person, take it out, get lost, if you can't take it out. Leave this woman here, go raise the money. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the drunkard didn't care. He walked towards Jiang Hai and said with a smirk on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai and the others couldn't help but look at each other, then they all laughed unconsciously. I'm laughing at your M13. Looking at the mocking smile on Jiang Hai and the others' faces, this made the drunkard quite unhappy. He glared at them and then shouted loudly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai raised the glasses on his face, the glasses he bought in the beginning. This pair of glasses has a camera function. Originally, Jiang Hai wore it for fun, but now it seems that this is called evidence. I'm laughing at you, you son of a b***tch. When your mother gave birth to you, did she throw you away and raise the placenta? I really feel that your IQ is the lowest among all the animals in this house. Even the cockroaches over there are smarter than you. Also, idiot 13, you have bad breath, stay away from me. Looking at this guy, Jiang Hai glanced at him contemptuously, then said with a face of disgust. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the black man who was scolded was stunned. After he reacted, he was instantly furious. He raised his fist and punched Jiang Hai's face heavily. Chapter 561. This black man's name was Fields Chalkley. He was different from the average Native American. He was actually an African. When he was 12 years old, he saved the life of the former leader of this poaching organization and killed a leopard that wanted to eat him. At that time, the former leader felt that this kid was ruthless and strong enough, so he brought him to the United States. He raised the organization with his son. Before the new year, the former leader retired and handed the organization over to his son. Fields Chalkley, who was his godson, was only second to one in the organization and above everyone else. He came to the United States at the age of 12. He was not interested in learning about culture, but he had been studying combat and fighting. When he was 15, he had fought in New York's underground boxing ring. When he was 20, he had killed 3 forest rangers in Africa on his first mission. He was 30 years old this year. His body was at its peak, and his experience was at its maximum. He was also at his most ruthless and merciless. Usually, he was lawless, but he knew his own situation. His brain wasn't very good, so he wasn't that ambitious. Other than money, women, blood, and alcohol, he wasn't interested in power. The reason why the organization wanted him was because he was a top fighter, so the leader naturally trusted him very much. He even called the subordinates of this organization to call Fields Chalkley Big Brother. It was because of this that this man was quite arrogant here. He could not remember how long it had been since someone dared to talk to him like Jiang Hai. But it did not mean that he would not teach Jiang Hai a lesson if he dared to talk to him like this. In his eyes, Jiang Hai's head would probably be directly flattened by his punch. Fortunately, he still held back and didn't hit Jiang Hai's temple. He only hit Jiang Hai's face. If Jiang Hai died, there would be some trouble. He might have to hide abroad for 8 to 10 years. But it didn't matter if he only injured Jiang Hai. In his view, Jiang Hai was motionless at this time. That meant he was scared silly. This yellow-skinned guy was too cowardly. This reminded him of the possums on the grassland. The courage of those little guys might be about the same as Jiang Hai. However, just when he felt that his fist was only a few centimeters away from hitting Jiang Hai's face, he suddenly stopped. It seems that you really don't want to live. Looking at the fist in front of him, Jiang Hai chuckled and said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, he kicked Fields in the stomach. In an instant, Fields flew backward as if he had been hit by a car, knocking over many cages. Fortunately, the cages he knocked over were not big guys, and the quality of the cages was good, so the animals were not released. Even so, all the animals in the room began to scream in pain. Hearing the screams of the animals, the guards outside immediately reacted and rushed in to see the situation. Do it. Since the fight had already started, Jiang Hai would not be polite to these guys. He looked at the first person who rushed in and saw that Fields was lying there, not knowing if he was dead or alive. Without saying a word, he immediately raised the gun in his hand. These guys more or less had some military background, and the weapons in their hands were all automatic weapons. Although it was the oldest model of the M16, the bullets coming at them were no joke. Although there was a big gap between the first generation and the fourth generation, the gap was not to the point where it could not kill people. Unfortunately, as soon as the bullets were fired, Bell had already pulled out his gun in an instant. Without even looking, he went up and fired 3 shots. Then, the man fell down with an incredulous look on his face. When he fell down, the 3 spots of blood on his chest gradually oozed out. The man's fall caused more people to rush in from outside. Unfortunately, the door was only so big. Jiang Hai and Azalina also pulled out their guns in an instant. As long as they guarded the door, the enemies would not be able to come in. Barton was about to move at this time, but Conrad had already rushed in. This time, his fist was as big as a pot. With a bang, his fist smashed into the man's face. Barton spun 4 or 5 times in the air before landing heavily on the ground. As for Philemon, he had already squatted in a corner. He knew that whether it was Jiang Hai, the woman, the big guy, or Bell, no one could deal with them easily. They were not people that ordinary people could deal with. What he needed to do was to protect himself. That was all. This warehouse was built very sturdily. No one could get in from outside. Jiang Hai and the other 2 were standing at the door. Even if they only had pistols, the people outside would not be able to rush in. They could only keep shooting at the door. Although they could not hit Jiang Hai and the others, the animals near the door were in big trouble. They were all in cages and could not escape. The bullets were fired one after another. Many animals fell in a pool of blood. The threat of death and the existence of blood made the remaining animals go crazy. But it still had no effect. For a while, the people on both sides were in a deadlock. While reloading, Jiang Hai also squatted down and looked at Philemon next to him. Call the police. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philemon also took out his mobile phone and called the police. There were more than a dozen people outside. Jiang Hai was not going to fight them head-on. Who knew if they had reinforcements? The call was quickly connected. After hearing the gunshots, the police did not say anything. They asked for the address and immediately dispatched the police. This was a shooting, and the victim was a rich man from Winthrop. They had to deal with this matter carefully. If there was any bad influence, it would be big trouble. In fact, they did not know that if they provoked Jiang Hai, they would be in big trouble. After confirming that the police were coming, Jiang Hai also called Moses Adams. Today, people died. Although the people who died were from the other side, Jiang Hai and the others were justified in self-defense. However, it was better to have a lawyer. When Moses Adams heard Jiang Hai's gunfire, he knew that something must have happened to Jiang Hai. He immediately drove from Boston to the town. Although the warehouse where Jiang Hai and the others were in was a relatively remote place, it was at the back of the town. The town's police rushed over immediately. When the people outside heard the police alarm, they were already panicking. At this time, they could not rush into the warehouse. If they rushed in, they would really die. That meant that they had no way to take hostages, and there were police outside. It seemed that they were in trouble. Just as these people were thinking about whether to escape or surrender, the police had already made a move. The person inside was Jiang Hai, the richest man in Winthrop. He had just prepared to spend tens of millions to buy cattle in their town. They had to pay taxes. At this time, if something happened to Jiang Hai, they would probably lose their jobs. Most importantly, they had already confirmed that Jiang Hai and the others were in the warehouse. The problem was not big, so what were they waiting for? Without saying anything, the police outside directly knocked down the door of the first warehouse. Before these poachers could figure out what was going on, a few of them had already been beaten down by the police who rushed in. They looked at their teammates lying in a pool of blood. These people understood that they could not win, so they surrendered. Anyway, they were just selling wild animals. Even if they were arrested, they would be released after 3 to 5 years. This was considered a relatively small crime. As underlings, it was not worthwhile for them to risk their lives for 3 to 5 years. They were only responsible for guarding the prisoners, and they did not have any lives in their hands. With the first person surrendering, the others followed. When the police shouted and the people outside were under control, Jiang Hai and the others also breathed a sigh of relief. Jiang Hai also smacked his lips at this time. He originally wanted to buy some wild animals back, but now it seemed that wild animals were almost all dead. Those that were not dead were probably taken to places like the zoo. He and these guys were not fated to be together. Especially the beasts that Jiang Hai had his eyes on, black leopards, tigers, and lions. At this time, they were either dead or injured. When Jiang Hai turned his head, he found that the cages of the crocodile and the green forest boa not far behind him were also shot through. The green forest boa was shot 3 times, but the snake's vitality was still very strong, and it was still there tenaciously moving. As for the bay crocodile, it was not better. It was also shot twice. At this time, it was lying there, motionless. It depends on your luck. To be honest, Jiang Hai likes these 2 animals very much. He hesitated for a moment, but before the police rushed in, he separated a part of his aura and sent it into the bodies of the 2 animals. The moment the 2 animals finished absorbing the aura, Jiang Hai immediately released his aura. The police also rushed in. Jiang Hai and the others were very cooperative and threw the gun away, then squatted down with their hands on their heads. Although Jiang Hai didn't want to lose face like this, he didn't want any young people to take things too hard and shoot him. How wronged would that be? When in the police station, when Moses Adams was there, Jiang Hai could be arrogant. But now he was not in the police station. He was facing the black muzzle of a gun. At this time, it would not be wrong to be afraid. After the police came in, they first took control of Jiang Hai and the others, then checked the injuries of Barton and the man who was kicked by Jiang Hai, and immediately called an ambulance. Then Jiang Hai and the dozen people who had their guns taken away were taken to the police station together. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.